The gallows rope snapped before Cole Maddox could die, but the fall broke more than his neck. It shattered every lie he'd believed about loyalty and love. Now, with a bullet scar where the noose had burned and a price on his head that could buy half the frontier, he rode into Arroyo Verde, seeking the man who'd betrayed him for gold. But the dusty border town had its own demons, and when Cole's past collided with the tyrant's present, the entire territory would learn that some men don't die easy, and they sure as hell don't forgive. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's ride into this tale together. The desert wind carried dust and secrets in equal measure as Cole Maddox guided his black gelding down the narrow trail into Arroyo Verde. The horse's hooves kicked up small clouds that settled on his worn boots and the faded duster that had seen better years. Cole kept his hat low, shading eyes that had witnessed too much death to fear it anymore. The town emerged from the heat shimmer like a collection of wooden bones scattered across the valley floor. Adobe buildings crouched alongside timber storefronts, their paint peeling under the relentless sun. A bell tower rose from what looked like a mission church, its shadow falling across a plaza where a fountain had long since run dry. Beyond the main street, crude shacks huddled together, worker housing, Cole guessed, from the way the structures seemed to lean on each other for support. He'd ridden 300 miles since the hanging, and every one of those miles had been purchased with pain. His neck still bore the rope burn, a vicious scar that circled his throat like a second collar. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he could still feel the noose tightening, could still taste the cotton they'd stuffed in his mouth to muffle his final words. But the rope had been old, weakened by desert sun and careless storage. When the trapdoor dropped, physics had favored survival over execution. The fall had knocked him unconscious. He'd woken in a ravine where the scaffold supports had dumped him, still bound, still gagged, but breathing. The federal agents had marked him dead in their reports and moved on, eager to claim the bounty they'd been promised. They hadn't counted on Cole Maddox being the kind of man who crawled out of his own grave. Now he was hunting ghosts. Two ghosts in particular. Victor Hale and Lena Marquez, partners who'd become lovers who'd become traitors. They'd sold him to the law for Spanish gold, then disappeared into the frontier's endless sprawl. But Cole had patience and resources of his own. 6 months of careful listening in cantinas and trading posts had finally yielded a name and a location. Victor Hale was in Arroyo Verde. The main street stretched before him, wide enough for freight wagons to pass without touching. Boardwalks lined both sides, offering shade to the few people brave enough to venture out in the midday heat. Cole noticed how their eyes tracked him, how conversations stopped as he passed. Strangers were always watched in border towns, but this felt different. This felt like fear. A cantina occupied the corner where the road bent toward the plaza. The broken spur, according to the weathered sign that swung on rusted chains. Cole dismounted, tying his horse to the hitching post with practiced efficiency. His hand brushed the Colt revolver at his hip. An unconscious gesture, checking the weapon was still there, still accessible. The cantina's interior offered blessed relief from the heat. Adobe walls kept the space cool, and shuttered windows filtered the harsh sunlight into soft amber bands that striped the rough-hewn tables. A bar ran the length of one wall, bottles of varying quality arranged on shelves that had been built by someone who didn't believe in right angles. Half a dozen men occupied the space, their conversations dropping to whispers as Cole entered. The bartender was a thick-shouldered Mexican with gray threading his mustache, and eyes that had seen enough to recognize trouble when it walked through his door. He set down the glass he'd been wiping and waited, his expression carefully neutral. "Whiskey," Cole said, his voice carrying the rasp of a man who'd spent too long breathing desert air. "Whatever won't kill me. In this town, senor, that is a very short list." But the bartender poured anyway, sliding the glass across wood worn smooth by countless elbows. "You have business in Arroyo Verde?" "Looking for work." The lie came easily. Cole had learned long ago that the truth was a luxury that could get you killed. "Then you have come to the wrong place, or perhaps the right one, depending on how you value your life." The bartender's tone carried a warning disguised as conversation. "Rafael Madero owns everything worth owning here. The cattle, the land, the water. Even the air we breathe, he would tax if he could find a way to measure it." Cole took a slow sip of the whiskey. It burned less than expected. Sounds like a man who needs killing. The words dropped into the room like stones into a well, and the silence that followed was deep enough to drown in. The other patrons shifted, suddenly very interested in their drinks. The bartender's hand moved toward something below the bar. A shotgun, most likely, before he caught himself and froze. That kind of talk will get you planted in the desert, amigo. The bartender's voice had gone soft, the way men's voices do when they're trying to prevent violence. Madero has 30 men who would gut you for sport. The sheriff is his brother-in-law. The judge owes him money. You cannot fight what you cannot see, and Madero is everywhere in this town. Before Cole could respond, the cantina door slammed open hard enough to rattle the bottles. 3 men entered, bringing with them the smell of horse sweat and arrogance. They wore range clothes, dusty shirts, leather chaps, spurs that jangled with each step. But their boots were expensive, and the revolvers on their hips were clean and well-maintained. Madero's men, Cole thought, had to be. The one in front was tall and broad, with a face that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts that didn't quite match. His nose had been broken multiple times, healing crooked each time. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, pulling it into a permanent skeptical arch. He surveyed the room with the casual authority of a man who'd never been told no. "Antonio," he said, addressing the bartender without looking at him, "you got any of that good tequila left? The stuff you keep hidden for special occasions?" "I have only what you see, Garrett." Antonio's voice had gone flat, all the warmth drained out. "Everything else was purchased by Senor Madero last month." Garrett's laugh was like gravel sliding down a metal chute. "That's right. I forgot. The boss don't like his employees drinking better than he does." His eyes finally landed on Cole, and something shifted in his expression. A hunter recognizing prey. "Who's this?" "Just a drifter," Antonio said quickly. "Passing through, no trouble." "I'll decide what's trouble." Garrett moved closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. His 2 companions fanned out slightly, a practiced motion that put Cole in a triangle of potential violence. "You got a name, Drifter?" Cole set down his glass carefully. "Most people call me Cole." "Most people, but not all?" Garrett grinned, showing teeth that were surprisingly white against his weathered face. "See, that's interesting. Man who's careful about what he's called is usually a man with something to hide, or a man who values his privacy." "Privacy." Garrett rolled the word around like he was tasting it. "You hear that, boys? Man wants privacy. In Arroyo Verde." He leaned against the bar, close enough that Cole could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Problem is, Mr. Madero don't care much for privacy. He likes to know who's in his town, what they want, how long they're staying. Call it a courtesy. Call it common sense. Call it whatever makes you comfortable. I'm just looking for work." "Work." Garrett's eyes narrowed. "What kind of work?" "The kind that pays." One of Garrett's companions, a lean man with a knife scar running from his ear to his collar, snickered. "This one's got a mouth on him, Garrett. Maybe we should teach him some manners." "Maybe we should." Garrett straightened, his hand dropping casually toward his holster. Not a threat, not yet, but a promise of where things could go. "See, Cole, can I call you Cole? We got rules in this town, and the first rule is that strangers pay a toll. Call it a welcoming fee. $20 ought to cover it. That's robbery. That's taxation. Big difference. One's legal, one ain't. Guess which one we are." Cole could feel the weight of every eye in the room. The other patrons had gone still, barely breathing, waiting to see if blood would spill. Antonio had his hand below the bar again, fingers probably wrapped around that shotgun, though whether he'd use it to protect Cole or finish him was anybody's guess. The smart play was to pay. $20 was nothing compared to staying alive. But Cole hadn't survived a hanging by making smart plays. He'd survived by being meaner than the men trying to kill him, by refusing to bend when every instinct screamed that he should. "No," he said quietly. The word hung in the air like smoke. Garrett's smile widened. "No? I don't pay tolls to bullies." The lean man with the scar moved first, his hand darting toward his gun with the speed of someone who'd practiced the draw 1,000 times. But Cole had spent 2 years running from federal agents and bounty hunters, had learned to read violence in the shift of a man's weight, the flicker of an eye. His own hand moved in a blur, the Colt clearing leather faster than thought. The shot was thunder in the enclosed space. The lean man screamed, clutching his hand where Cole's bullet had shattered the grip of his revolver, sending the weapon spinning across the floor. Blood welled between his fingers, and he dropped to his knees, cursing in a steady stream that would have made a sailor blush. Cole swung the Colt toward Garrett, who'd frozen with his own gun halfway drawn. "You want to finish pulling that iron, or you want to keep your hand?" Garrett's jaw worked, muscles bunching under his skin. For a long moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then, slowly, he raised his hands, palms out. "Easy, friend. No need for this to get ugly. Too late for that." Cole kept the gun level, aimed at Garrett's chest. "Now you and your boys are going to walk out of here. You're going to tell Madero that there's a new rule in town. Strangers don't pay tolls. They don't get robbed. They get treated with respect, or they get treated to what your friend there just got. You just made the worst mistake of your life." Garrett's voice was tight with suppressed rage. "Madero owns this town. He owns the sheriff. He owns the judge. He owns every man worth owning. You'll be dead before sunset." "Then I better make good use of the daylight." Garrett helped his wounded companion to his feet, both of them backing toward the door. The third man, who'd been smart enough to keep his hands visible, followed close behind. At the threshold, Garrett paused. "What's your real name?" he asked. "Man's got a right to know who killed him." Cole considered lying, but the truth would serve him better now. If they were going to hunt him anyway, might as well let them know what they were hunting. "Some people call me Damon Blake." The color drained from Garrett's face. Even wounded and cursing, the lean man went quiet. The name carried weight in the territories, weight built from bodies and burned buildings, from trains robbed and banks emptied. Damon Blake was a ghost story told to keep children from wandering at night. Damon Blake had been hanged 3 weeks ago in Silver Creek. "You're lying," Garrett whispered, but his eyes said he wasn't sure. "Am I?" Cole tilted his head, letting the light catch the rope scar on his neck. "Guess you'll have to ask the hangman how good his knots are." They left in a hurry, the door banging shut behind them. Cole listened to their boots pounding across the boardwalk, heard horses being mounted in frantic haste, the thunder of hooves fading toward the edge of town. Then he holstered the Colt and turned back to the bar. Antonio was staring at him like he'd just watched a man walk through walls. "Damon Blake died," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone knows this. The federal agents, they published the report. There was a trial, a hanging." "There was a hanging," Cole agreed. "The dying part didn't take." "Madre de Dios." Antonio crossed himself, then poured 2 glasses of whiskey, pushing one across to Cole. "You should leave. Right now, before Madero sends his entire crew." "Can't do that." "Why not? You have a death wish?" "Because that is what staying here means." Cole drained the whiskey in one swallow, welcoming the burn. "I'm here for Victor Hale. Heard he rides with Madero's outfit." Understanding dawned in Antonio's eyes, followed quickly by resignation. "See, Victor is Madero's best gun. They say he is faster than a snake, meaner than a scorpion. He handles the dirty work that even Garrett will not touch." He paused, studying Cole's scarred neck. "This Victor, he is the one who betrayed you?" "Him and a woman named Lena Marquez. Know her?" "No. But if she betrayed Damon Blake, she is either very brave or very stupid. Or perhaps she is dead already. I'll find out." Cole tossed coins on the bar, more than enough to cover the whiskey and the trouble he'd brought. "Where does Madero keep his men?" "There is a compound outside town, north, maybe 2 miles, but you cannot just ride in there. They will shoot you before you reach the gate." "I'm not planning to knock on the front door." Cole headed for the exit, then paused. "One more thing. If anyone asks, you never saw me. Senor Blake, or Cole, or whoever you truly are, in 1 hour, everyone in Arroyo Verde will know exactly what you look like and exactly what you did. This is not a town that keeps secrets." Antonio's expression was grim. "But I will tell them you headed south. It is the least I can do for a dead man walking." The afternoon sun hit Cole like a hammer when he stepped outside. His horse was where he'd left it, but a crowd had gathered across the street, workers mostly, their clothes stained with dust and sweat. their faces bearing the weathered look of men who labored in brutal conditions for little pay. They watched him with expressions that mixed fear and something else. Hope, maybe. Or hunger for someone to stand up to the power that kept them down. A young man separated from the group, moving with the reckless energy of someone who hadn't yet learned that courage and stupidity often wore the same face. He couldn't have been more than 20, with dark hair falling across his forehead and eyes that burned with barely contained intensity. He wore range clothes that had seen hard use, and a revolver rode his hip in a holster that had been oiled recently. "That true?" the young man asked, his Spanish accent softening the English words. "You really Damon Blake? Does it matter?" "Hell yes, it matters." The young man grinned, and it transformed his face from serious to almost boyish. Damon Blake robbed the Territorial Bank in Phoenix. He hit the Southern Pacific Railroad so many times they put a $10,000 bounty on his head. They say he once shot 5 men in Tucson without breaking a sweat. They say a lot of things. Cole untied his horse, checking the saddle cinch out of habit. Most of them are lies. But some are true, yeah? The young man extended his hand. "I'm Ethan Cruz. My father works Madero's South Range. Been watching that bastard grind people into dust my whole life. If you're really here to cause him trouble, I want in." Cole looked at the offered hand but didn't take it. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to kill a man. After that, I'm gone. This isn't a revolution. Maybe it should be." Ethan's hand dropped, but his enthusiasm didn't dim. "You just shot one of Garrett's crew. Nobody does that and lives. But you're still breathing, which means you're either the luckiest son of a bitch in the territory or the most dangerous. Either way, you're going to need help. I work alone. Then you're going to die alone. You don't know this country. You don't know Madero's setup. You don't know which trails lead to water and which ones lead to graves." Ethan's voice dropped, losing some of its bravado. "But I do. I've been riding these ranges since I could sit a horse. I know every canyon, every creek, every place a man could hide or make a stand. You want to get to Victor Hale? I can get you there." Cole studied the young man, weighing the offer against the risk. Taking on a partner meant sharing information, trusting someone he didn't know, creating vulnerabilities. But Ethan was right about one thing. Cole was operating blind in unfamiliar territory, and that was a recipe for getting killed. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why risk your life for a stranger?" Ethan's expression hardened, years suddenly visible in eyes that had seen too much. "Because 2 months ago, Madero's men burned out a family on the East Range, the Garcias. They'd been there 3 generations, but Madero wanted their water rights. When old man Garcia refused to sell, they torched his house with him inside. His wife and daughters barely got out." He paused, swallowing hard. "My sister was engaged to his son. Miguel tried to fight back. They shot him in the street like a dog." The words hung between them, heavy with grief and rage. Cole recognized the look in Ethan's eyes, had seen it in his own reflection after Victor's betrayal. It was the look of a man who'd lost faith in justice and was ready to embrace vengeance instead. "This won't bring him back," Cole said quietly. "No, but maybe it'll stop it from happening to someone else." Ethan met his gaze steadily. "You got your reasons for hunting Victor Hale. I got mine for wanting Madero to bleed. Seems to me we could help each other." Before Cole could respond, the sound of galloping horses cut through the afternoon air. He turned, hand dropping to his colt, as a dozen riders thundered down the main street. They wore the same expensive boots and well-maintained weapons as Garrett's crew, but these men moved with the disciplined precision of soldiers rather than common thugs. At their head rode a man who could only be Rafael Madero. He was younger than Cole expected, maybe 40, with the kind of aristocratic features that spoke of Spanish blood and old money. His clothes were tailored, a black vest over a crisp white shirt, trousers that had never seen trail dust, boots polished to a mirror shine. A silver-trimmed sombrero shaded his face, and the gun on his hip had an ivory handle that probably cost more than most men earned in a year. But it was his eyes that marked him as dangerous. They were cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who'd built an empire on other people's suffering and felt no remorse about it. The riders fanned out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. Madero remained mounted, looking down at Cole with an expression that mixed amusement and contempt. "So," he said, his English flawless and unaccented, You're the man who shot Diego's hand. Garrett tells me you claim to be Damon Blake, risen from the dead. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's quite a story. I almost want to believe it. Believe what you want. Cole kept his voice level, his hand near his gun but not touching it. 12 against 1 were bad odds, but they got worse if he showed fear. Oh, I intend to. Madero leaned forward in his saddle, leather creaking softly. See, I have a problem. Either you're lying about being Blake, in which case you're just another drifter with delusions of grandeur, or you're telling the truth, in which case you're worth $10,000 to the federal marshals. He paused, letting that sink in. Either way, you've disrupted my town, wounded my man, and made me look weak in front of my workers. That's a debt that needs settling. I'll pay it in lead if that's how you want it. Madero laughed, a genuine sound of delight. I like you. You've got spine, but spine doesn't stop bullets, and you're outnumbered 12 to 1. Even Damon Blake isn't that fast. He gestured to his men. Take him. Alive if possible, dead if necessary. The riders began to dismount, moving with the casual confidence of men who'd done this before. Cole's mind raced, calculating angles and distances, looking for any advantage. He could probably drop 2, maybe 3 before they swarmed him. After that, it would be fists and boots, and probably a bullet in the back of the head. Then Ethan stepped forward, putting himself between Cole and Madero's men. No, he said, his voice shaking but firm. Madero's amusement died. Ethan Cruz, your father is a good worker. Don't make me tell him I had to bury his son because the boy didn't know when to mind his own business. This is my business. Ethan's hand hovered near his gun, and Cole could see the tremor in his fingers. The kid was terrified, but he held his ground. You've taken enough from this town. You don't get to take him too. Move aside, boy. No. Madero's expression hardened into something that looked like stone. Then you'll die with him. The moment stretched, tension building like a storm about to break. Cole measured the distance to his horse, knowing he wouldn't make it. Knowing that in about 10 seconds, this dusty street would become a killing ground, and both he and this foolish, brave kid would be bleeding out in the dirt. Then a voice cut through the silence, high and clear. Raphael! Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway of the general store, her face pale but determined. She wore a simple dress that had been mended multiple times, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, but her eyes blazed with the kind of fury that made men reconsider their choices. Maria, Madero said, his tone softening slightly. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us. She stepped into the street and other women followed. Shopkeepers' wives, washerwomen, the women who kept the town running while men like Madero tore it apart. They formed a line between Cole and the mounted men, their presence more powerful than any gun. You want to shoot this stranger? Fine, but you'll have to shoot through us first. And I wonder how many workers will stay loyal to a man who murders their wives and mothers in the street. Madero's jaw clenched. Cole could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing power against pragmatism. The women weren't armed, but they were witnesses. And witnesses could turn into martyrs, and martyrs could turn into revolutions. This isn't over, Madero said finally, his gaze fixed on Cole. You've got until sunset to leave Arroyo Verde. After that, anyone who helps you dies alongside you. That's not a threat. That's a promise. He wheeled his horse around, his men following suit. They galloped back down the street, leaving dust and tension in their wake. The women dispersed slowly, Maria giving Cole a long look before disappearing back into the store. Cole released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His hand was cramping from being held near his gun for so long. Ethan was grinning like a fool. Did you see that? Did you see Madero's face when Maria stepped out? I thought he was going to... You almost got us both killed. Cole grabbed the young man's shoulder, squeezing hard enough to make him wince. That was stupid. Brave, but stupid. You don't throw your life away for a stranger. You're not a stranger anymore. Ethan pulled free, rubbing his shoulder. You're the man who stood up to Garrett. That makes you something this town hasn't had in years. That makes you hope. I'm not hope. I'm just a man settling a score. Maybe, but scores have a way of settling more than one thing. Ethan's expression turned serious. You got until sunset. After that, Madero will come with everything he's got. You need to decide what you're going to do." Cole looked down the street toward where Madero's men had disappeared. The sun was already sliding toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. He had maybe 4 hours before darkness fell, and with it, any chance of leaving safely. But he hadn't ridden 300 miles to run now. "I need information," he said, "about Victor Hale. Where he goes, what he does, when he's alone." "I can get that." Ethan was already moving, heading toward the livery stable. "Come on, we'll take the back trails, circle around to the compound. I know a spot where we can watch without being seen." "We? You think I'm letting you ride out there alone? After that speech about needing help?" Ethan threw a grin over his shoulder. "Besides, you just made yourself the most wanted man in the territory. Somebody's got to watch your back." Cole hesitated, every instinct telling him to refuse. He'd worked alone for 2 years, trusting no one, relying on nothing but his own skill and luck. Partners got you killed. Partners betrayed you. Partners had put a noose around his neck and left him for dead. But something in Ethan's earnest face, in the determination burning behind his fear, reminded Cole of who he'd been before Victor's betrayal. Young, idealistic, believing that loyalty meant something. Maybe that version of himself was dead, hanged alongside Damon Blake on a scaffold in Silver Creek. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time to find out if any part of him had survived the fall. "All right," he said quietly, "but we do this my way. You follow my lead, you don't take stupid risks, and if things go bad, you run. Understood?" "Understood." Ethan's grin widened. "This is going to be—" "Don't." Cole cut him off. "Don't say it's going to be anything. The minute you start thinking about what comes next is the minute you stop paying attention to what's happening now. And what's happening now is we're about to ride into enemy territory with half the town ready to kill us. So save the celebration for when we're both still breathing." The grin faded, replaced by something more sober. "Right. Sorry." They moved quickly, gathering supplies from the livery: water, ammunition, dried meat. Ethan's horse was a paint mare, young but steady, with intelligent eyes that tracked Cole's movements. The stable owner, an old man with hands gnarled by arthritis, didn't ask questions. He just took Ethan's money and looked away, giving them the same mercy Antonio had offered in the cantina, the mercy of pretending not to see. They left through the back of town, following a trail that wound between workers' shacks and into the scrubland beyond. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air to liquid heat that shimmered off the rocks. Cole felt sweat trickling down his spine, soaking into the shirt beneath his duster. "There," Ethan said after an hour of riding, pointing toward a ridge that overlooked a small valley. "Madero's compound. That's where Victor will be." Cole studied the layout through eyes that had learned to read terrain for tactical advantage. The compound was well positioned, backed against a cliff face that prevented approach from the north, with clear sightlines in every other direction. Buildings clustered around a central courtyard where horses were corralled. Men moved between structures, going about the business of maintaining a small army. And somewhere in that nest of vipers was Victor Hale, the man who'd smiled while putting a noose around Cole's neck, the man who'd kissed Lena Marquez while Cole suffocated in a prison cell, the man who was going to pay for every moment of betrayal with blood and screaming. "We wait," Cole said, settling into a position that gave him a view of the compound while keeping him hidden behind rocks. "Watch. Learn their patterns. Find out when Victor's vulnerable. And then what?" Cole's hand drifted to the rope scar on his neck, fingers tracing the raised tissue. "Then I remind him that dead men don't stay buried." They watched as the sun crawled across the sky, as shadows lengthened and the heat slowly released its stranglehold on the land. Men came and went from the compound, some on horseback, others on foot. Cole memorized faces, counted weapons, noted which buildings seemed important and which were just for show. And finally, as the day bled toward evening, he saw him. Victor Hale emerged from the main house, and even at this distance, Cole recognized the way he moved, confident, lethal, like a predator that had never known fear because it had never met anything more dangerous than itself. He'd put on weight since their last meeting, prosperity filling out the lean frame that had once matched Cole's own. His clothes were expensive, his boots polished, his gun riding easy on his hip. He looked successful, happy, comfortable, He looked like a man who'd gotten away with murder. Cole's hand tightened on his rifle until his knuckles went white. "That him?" Ethan whispered. "Yeah." The word came out rough, scraped raw by memories of betrayal. "That's him. What do you want to do?" Good question. The smart play was to wait for darkness, slip into the compound, put a bullet in Victor's brain while he slept. Clean, quiet, efficient. The kind of kill that Damon Blake would have made without hesitation. But Cole Maddox wasn't Damon Blake anymore. Or maybe he was more Blake than he'd ever been, because the rage burning in his chest demanded more than a quick death. It demanded confession, recognition, the moment when Victor understood exactly what his betrayal had cost. It demanded the look in his eyes when he realized that the dead had come for him. "We need him alone," Cole said. "Away from the compound, somewhere he can't call for help." "That's not going to be easy. Madero keeps his top men close." "Then we make it happen." Cole shifted, checking the position of the sun. "You said you know these trails. Is there a way to cut him off if he leaves the compound?" "Maybe. There's a canyon about 3 miles west, only one way in, one way out. If we could force him that direction—" Ethan paused, understanding dawning. "You want to set a trap." "I want to have a conversation. The trap is just to make sure he stays for the whole thing." They spent the next hour planning, Ethan sketching a rough map in the dirt, Cole adding details from his memory of similar ambushes in his outlaw days. It was risky, dependent on too many variables, but desperation had a way of making bad plans seem workable. As darkness finally claimed the sky, Cole made his decision. "Tomorrow," he said. "We hit him tomorrow. Tonight, we rest and prepare. Because once this starts, there's no going back." Ethan nodded, his young face serious in the fading light. "And after? After Victor's dead and Madero comes hunting? What then?" Cole looked out at the compound, at the lights beginning to glow in windows, at the men settling in for another night of sleeping soundly, while people like Maria and Antonio and Ethan's father lived in fear. "Then we see how many of them we can take down before they take us down." It wasn't a plan. It wasn't even hope. But it was all they had, and sometimes, in the dark places where justice had forgotten to shine its light, that had to be enough. The night passed with the agonizing slowness of men waiting for violence. Cole and Ethan made camp in a shallow depression 1/2 mile from Madero's compound, close enough to watch but far enough to avoid patrols. They didn't risk a fire, eating cold jerky and drinking tepid water from their canteens while the desert temperature plummeted from furnace to freezer. Cole took first watch, his eyes tracking the distant lights of the compound while his mind churned through memories he'd spent 2 years trying to bury. Victor's laugh, Lena's perfume, the weight of Spanish gold in leather saddlebags that he'd never gotten to spend. The three of them had been a perfect crew. Cole's planning, Victor's gun work, Lena's ability to charm information from men who should have known better. They'd hit 6 banks in 8 months, always staying one step ahead of the law, always disappearing before the pauses could organize. Then came the job in Santa Fe, a payroll shipment carrying $20,000 in federal gold, guarded by only 4 soldiers. Easy money, Victor had said. One last score before they retired to Mexico and lived like kings. Cole should have known it was too easy. The soldiers had been expecting them, rifles already aimed when Cole and Victor rode into the ambush. But instead of shooting, they'd simply waited while Lena emerged from behind a supply wagon, her smile apologetic, but her eyes cold as January ice. "I'm sorry, Cole," she'd said, and maybe she even meant it. But 20,000 split 2 ways is better than 3. Victor had taken Cole's guns while the soldiers bound his wrists. "Nothing personal, partner, just business. You understand." Cole had understood perfectly. He'd understood that loyalty was a fairy tale told to children. He'd understood that trust was a weapon people used to get close enough to slide a knife between your ribs. He'd understood that the only person you could rely on was yourself, and even that was negotiable when the price was right. The trial had been quick, the sentence quicker. Federal judges didn't waste time on outlaws caught red-handed with stolen gold. 3 weeks from arrest to execution, barely enough time to get used to the idea of dying. Except he hadn't died. The rope had broken, the fall had knocked him unconscious, and when he'd woken up in that ravine with his hands still bound and his neck screaming fire, he'd made himself a promise. He would survive. He would hunt down the people who'd betrayed him, and he would make them understand exactly what they'd taken from him. "You should sleep," Ethan whispered, appearing at Cole's shoulder like a ghost. "I'll watch." "Not tired." "Liar." Ethan settled beside him, his young face serious in the starlight. "You're running on rage and revenge. I've seen it before. My uncle, after the Apaches killed his family, he rode for 3 months straight, barely eating, barely sleeping, just hunting. When he finally caught up to them, he was so weak he couldn't even lift his rifle. They put 5 arrows in him before he hit the ground." "Your uncle lose?" "He died. But yeah, he lost too." Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "What I'm saying is, revenge is a fire that keeps you warm until it burns you alive. You need to be smart about this, not just angry." Cole turned to look at the kid, really look at him. Beneath the bravado and the reckless courage, there was something solid there. Something that reminded Cole of who he'd been before the world taught him that good men finished last. "Why are you really doing this?" Cole asked. "And don't give me that speech about Miguel and the Garcias. That's true, but it's not all of it." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant compound. "You ever feel like you were supposed to be something more? Like there's this person inside you that's bigger and braver and more important than the life you're actually living?" He laughed, but it sounded bitter. "My whole life I've been the worker's son, the kid who shovels horse shit and mends fences while men like Madero decide whether we eat or starve. I've watched my father bow and scrape to men who aren't fit to shine his boots. And I've thought, every single day, that there has to be more than this." "So you're using me to feel important?" "No, I'm using you to become important." Ethan met his gaze steadily. "You're Damon Blake. You've done things that people will tell stories about for 50 years. You've stood up to power and won. And yeah, maybe you lost too. Maybe that's why you're here hunting Victor instead of spending that gold in Mexico. But at least you tried. At least you lived a life that mattered." "I'm not a hero, kid. I'm a killer with a grudge." "Maybe. But right now, you're also the only man in Arroyo Verde who isn't afraid of Rafael Madero. That's worth something. That's worth a lot." Cole wanted to argue, to explain that heroism was just stupidity with good timing, that standing up to power usually meant getting crushed by it. But the kid's eyes held too much hope, too much desperate need to believe that one man could make a difference. So instead, Cole just nodded and said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Dawn came with the subtlety of a slap, the sun erupting over the eastern hills and flooding the desert with harsh, unforgiving light. Cole woke Ethan an hour after sunrise, and they ate a sparse breakfast while watching the compound come alive. Men emerged from the bunkhouse, stretching and yawning, heading toward the cookhouse for whatever passed for breakfast. Horses were saddled, supplies loaded onto wagons. The machinery of Madero's empire grinding forward into another day of control and intimidation. "There," Ethan said, pointing toward the main house. "That's Victor." Cole's hand tightened on his rifle. Victor descended the steps from the porch, dressed in clean range clothes and wearing his gun like it was part of his anatomy. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd never lost a gunfight, who believed himself untouchable. 2 other men flanked him, guards, probably, or just companions looking to bask in the reflected glory of Madero's favorite killer. "He's heading for the corral," Ethan observed, "probably going on patrol or collection runs. Madero sends his top men to collect protection money from the ranchers every Friday." "Today's Friday?" "All day." Cole felt something click into place in his mind, pieces of a plan assembling themselves with the cold logic of a chess player seeing checkmate 3 moves ahead. "Which route does he usually take?" "Depends on which ranches are due, but most of them are west and south, which means—" Ethan's eyes widened as he understood. "Which means he'll ride right past that canyon you wanted to use." "Not past it, through it." Cole was already moving, gathering their gear with quick, efficient movements. "If we can get ahead of him, set up in the rocks before he arrives. He'll have those guards with him, maybe more. Then we deal with the guards too." They rode hard, pushing their horses across terrain that shifted from hard-packed dirt to loose stone to patches of scrub grass that grabbed at the animals' hooves. The canyon Ethan had mentioned was more of a ravine, a narrow slash in the earth where water had once run, and might run again if the rains ever came. Walls of red rock rose 30 feet on either side, and the passage through was barely wide enough for a wagon, perfect for an ambush. They dismounted and led their horses deeper into the canyon, finding a spot where a rock slide had created a natural barricade. Cole positioned himself behind the largest boulder, his rifle resting on the stone, while Ethan took up a position across the passage with his pistol drawn. "Remember," Cole said, his voice carrying easily in the enclosed space, "we're not trying to kill everyone. Just separate Victor from his guards. Make them think they're under attack from multiple shooters. Get them scattered and confused. And if they don't scatter, then we improvise." Waiting was the hardest part. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon into an oven. Sweat soaked through Cole's shirt, and his throat felt like he'd swallowed sand. Twice, they heard riders approaching, only to have them pass by the canyon entrance without entering. False alarms that left Cole's nerves jangling and his finger itching on the trigger. Then, just past noon, the sound of hoofbeats echoed off stone walls, growing louder. Cole raised his hand, signaling Ethan to stay quiet and still. 3 riders appeared at the canyon's mouth, silhouetted against the bright sky beyond. Even at this distance, Cole recognized Victor's posture, the way he sat his horse like he owned the world. The riders entered the canyon, their horses' hooves clattering on stone. Victor was in the middle, flanked by his guards. One a barrel-chested man with a shotgun resting across his saddle, the other lean and nervous, his hand already hovering near his pistol. Cole let them get halfway through the passage before he fired. The shot was intentionally high, ricocheting off the canyon wall above their heads with a sound like a thunderclap. The horses spooked immediately, rearing and dancing sideways. The nervous guard's pistol cleared leather, but he had no target, just echoes and shadows, and the certain knowledge that someone was shooting at them from cover. Ethan fired next, his bullet kicking up dust near the barrel-chested man's horse. The animal bolted, carrying its rider back toward the canyon entrance despite the man's curses and attempts to regain control. The nervous guard followed, either fleeing or trying to find better cover. Cole didn't care which. That left Victor alone, fighting to control his horse, while his eyes scanned the rocks for shooters. Cole fired again, and this time Victor's horse had enough. It bucked hard, launching Victor from the saddle in an ungraceful tumble that ended with the man sprawled in the dirt, his gun jarred from his holster. Cole was moving before Victor hit the ground, scrambling down from his position with his rifle aimed at the fallen man's chest. Ethan appeared from the other side, breathing hard, his own gun steady despite the tremor in his hands. Victor rolled to his feet, reaching for his gun, then froze when he saw Cole's face. The color drained from his skin like water from a cracked bucket, and for a moment Cole thought the man might actually faint. "No," Victor whispered. "You're dead. They hanged you. I saw the reports. Reports lie." Cole kept the rifle level, savoring the fear in Victor's eyes. "Ropes break. Dead men walk. Surprised to see me?" Victor's mouth worked soundlessly, his mind visibly trying to process the impossible. Then his expression shifted, fear giving way to something calculating and cold. "Cole, Jesus, Cole, I can explain." "Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare try to explain. Don't tell me it was business. Don't tell me you had no choice. Don't insult me with lies when we both know the truth." "The truth?" Victor's laugh was shaky, desperate. "The truth is that job was never going to work. The soldiers knew we were coming. Someone had already sold us out before Lena and I ever talked. We just made the best of a bad situation. By putting a noose around my neck? By saving our own lives. What did you expect us to do? Die alongside you out of some misguided sense of loyalty?" Victor's voice rose, anger mixing with fear. "You want to know the real truth, Cole? You were always too soft, too concerned with honor and fairness and all that other bullshit that gets you killed in this business. Lena and I, we understood what you never could. In this world, you survive any way you can." Cole felt something cold settle in his chest, a kind of calm that came from finally having confirmation of what he'd always suspected. There would be no redemption here, no moment where Victor broke down and admitted his mistake. The man who'd called himself a partner, who'd shared whiskey and campfires and the bond of outlaw brotherhood, was exactly as poisonous as the betrayal had suggested. "Where is she?" Cole asked quietly. "Who, Lena?" Victor's eyes flicked sideways, looking for escape routes that didn't exist. "Gone. Took her share of the gold and disappeared. Haven't seen her in 2 years. Liar. I'm not lying. She left me, just like she helped leave you. That's what she does. She finds men dumb enough to trust her, bleeds them dry, then vanishes. Victor's laugh was bitter now, tinged with genuine pain. You think you're the only one she betrayed? She took my share too, Cole. Cleaned me out and disappeared into Mexico. So if you came here looking for her, you're wasting your time. Cole studied Victor's face, reading the micro-expressions that most people missed. The tightness around his eyes when he mentioned Lena. The way his jaw clenched when he said she'd taken his gold. The small tells that added up to a larger truth. He was lying, but not about everything. Lena had betrayed him too, that much was real. But she hadn't disappeared. Victor knew where she was, and that knowledge was written in every defensive line of his body. You're going to tell me where she is, Cole said. I already told you. Cole fired, the bullet passing so close to Victor's head that it singed his hair. The man yelped, stumbling backward, his hands raised in surrender. All right, Christ, you always were crazy. Where? She's in Copper Ridge, a mining town, 3 days north. She's running a saloon calling herself something different, but it's her. I swear that's the truth. Cole nodded slowly. That felt right. Lena had always liked the finer things, and a successful saloon in a mining town would provide both money and the kind of male attention she craved. How do you know this if she cleaned you out? Because I tracked her down, same as you tracked me. You think you're the only one who can hold a grudge? Victor's voice dropped, something almost pleading entering his tone. Look, Cole, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we can work this out. There's still gold from other jobs, money I've earned working for Madero. We could split it, 50-50, and you could ride out of here rich. Isn't that better than revenge? No. The word hung in the air between them, simple and final. Victor's face crumpled, and for the first time, Cole saw genuine terror in his old partner's eyes. Please, Victor whispered. We were friends once. That has to count for something. It counted for everything. That's why this hurts so much. Cole lowered the rifle, and Victor's expression flickered with hope. Then Cole drew his pistol and shot him in the leg. Victor screamed, collapsing to the ground and clutching his thigh, where blood was already soaking through his pants. You son of a bitch! You shot me! That's for the hangman's rope. Cole holstered his pistol and picked up the rifle again. Now you're going to tell me everything about Madero's operation, how many men he has, where they patrol, what his plans are. And if you lie to me even once, I'll shoot your other leg. Why do you care about Madero? You got what you wanted. You found me. Because your new boss decided to make me his problem, and I don't leave problems unsolved. What followed was an education in cruelty. Victor, faced with the choice between cooperation and crippling pain, chose survival. He talked for 20 minutes straight, spilling secrets about Madero's operation with the desperate fluency of a man trying to buy his life with information. The cattle baron had 40 men total, split between the compound and various ranches. He was planning a major land grab, forcing out the remaining independent ranchers through intimidation and violence. He had the sheriff bought, the judge owned, and enough political connections to weather any investigation. But he also had weaknesses. His men were loyal only as long as the pay was good. His compound, while well defended, relied on a single well for water. And most importantly, he had a temper. Push him hard enough, and he'd make mistakes. Ethan listened to all of this with growing horror and fascination. When Victor finally finished, his voice hoarse from talking and screaming, the young man looked at Cole with something approaching awe. You're really going to fight him, Ethan said. All 40 men. Not fight, outthink. Cole turned his attention back to Victor, who was pale from blood loss and fear. Last question. Madero's planning something big soon, isn't he? Something beyond the usual intimidation. Victor hesitated and Cole raised the rifle. All right, yes, he's planning something. A gold shipment coming through next week. Government gold headed for the mint in Denver. 20,000 in bars guarded by federal soldiers. Cole felt ice water pour down his spine. 20,000 in federal gold. Yeah, Madero's been planning the robbery for months. He's got inside information, knows the route, knows how many guards. It's supposed to be his big score, enough money to buy himself a governorship if he wants it. Victor's eyes were desperate now, sensing that he'd said something important but not understanding what. Why? What does it matter to you? Because it was the same job. The exact same setup that had landed Cole on the gallows 2 years ago. Same amount of gold, same federal guards, probably the same inside informant selling the information to anyone willing to pay. Which meant this wasn't just Madero's plan. This was Victor and Lena's old score, recycled and sold to a new buyer. They'd betrayed Cole, stolen the information he'd gathered, and now they were running the same con on Madero. The beautiful, terrible symmetry of it almost made Cole laugh. "When?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. 4 days from now. The shipment's taking the old military road through Blackwater Canyon. Victor was sweating despite the blood loss, his body going into shock. "Cole, I need a doctor. I'm bleeding bad. You'll live." "Ethan, bind his wound." "Not well, just enough to keep him from bleeding out in the next hour." Ethan moved forward hesitantly, pulling his bandana free and wrapping it around Victor's leg. The older man hissed in pain but didn't resist, understanding that resistance would only make things worse. "What are you going to do with me?" Victor asked when Ethan finished. Cole considered the question. The old Cole, the one who'd believed in brotherhood and loyalty, might have shown mercy, might have let Victor live with his wounds and his guilt and the knowledge that he'd been bested, but that Cole had died on the gallows in Silver Creek. The man who'd survived the fall was someone colder, harder, less concerned with mercy than with justice. "I'm going to give you a choice," Cole said finally. "You can ride back to Madero and tell him everything that happened here. Tell him Cole Maddox is coming for him. Tell him that I know about the gold shipment, and I'm going to make sure he never gets a single ounce of it. And the other option? You can try to run. Head for Mexico or California or anywhere you think I won't find you." Cole's smile was cold. "But know this, I found you once already. I can find you again. And next time, I won't just shoot your leg." Victor's face worked through a series of emotions: fear, anger, calculation, resignation. "You're insane. You know that, right? You're going to get yourself killed." "Already died once, didn't take." Cole gestured with the rifle. "Now choose. Run or warn Madero. Either way, you're out of my sight in the next 30 seconds, or I put a bullet in something more important than your leg." Victor chose running. He staggered to his feet, limping badly, and managed to catch his horse, which had wandered back during the interrogation. Mounting was an agonizing process that left him gasping and pale, but fear was a powerful motivator. Within a minute, he was riding back toward the compound, hunched over his saddle and trailing blood. Ethan watched him go, then turned to Cole with confusion written all over his face. "Why let him live? He betrayed you, helped put a rope around your neck. You should have killed him." "Killing him was never the point." "But then what is the point?" Cole stared at the dust trail Victor's horse had left, his mind already 3 moves ahead. "The point is to make him useful. Right now he's riding back to Madero, bleeding and terrified and full of information about me. He'll tell Madero everything, about the ambush, about my questions, about the gold shipment, and Madero, being the arrogant bastard he is, will think he's now got the upper hand. But he doesn't? No. Because while he's preparing for an attack on the gold shipment, we're going to hit him somewhere he's not expecting." Cole turned to face Ethan fully. "You said his compound relies on a single well for water?" Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. "You want to poison it?" "Not poison. Cut it off. Force him to send men away from the compound to find new water sources, thin out his forces. Then, while he's dealing with that crisis, we'll be elsewhere, causing different problems." That's actually brilliant. Evil, but brilliant. "Welcome to war, kid. It's never about fair fights. It's about making your enemy dance to your tune while you call the shots." Cole started walking toward his horse, Ethan falling into step beside him. "How many ranchers are left? Independent ones, not owned by Madero? Maybe a dozen families, most barely holding on, paying his protection fees just to survive. Think you could get them together? Tonight, somewhere secret?" "Maybe. But they're scared, Cole. They've seen what happens to people who resist. Then we show them what happens when they fight back." Cole swung into his saddle, feeling the familiar weight of purpose settling over him. Madero's built his empire on fear. Time to show him that fear cuts both ways. They rode back toward Arroyo Verde by a circuitous route, avoiding the main trails and keeping to the rough country where Madero's patrols rarely ventured. The afternoon sun hammered down on them, but Cole barely noticed. His mind was racing through possibilities, constructing and discarding plans with the methodical precision of a master strategist. The gold shipment was the key. Madero would commit his best men to that robbery, leaving the compound vulnerable. If Cole could somehow turn that strength into weakness, use Madero's greed against him. "There's something I don't understand," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "This gold shipment, the one Madero's planning to rob. You said it was the same job that got you caught. How is that possible?" Cole had been expecting the question. "Because Victor and Lena sold the same information twice. They probably figured I was dead and the intel was worthless to me, so why not make money off it again? Sell it to Madero, let him take the risk, maybe even collect a percentage if he succeeds. But if it's the same job, won't it be another trap? The same way it was a trap for you? Maybe. Or maybe the inside informant was real, and it was just Lena and Victor who set me up. Either way, Madero's walking into something dangerous." Cole's smile was thin and sharp. "Which works for us. Whether it's a successful robbery or an ambush, Madero's men will be away from the compound, focused on the gold. That's when we move." "Move to do what exactly?" "To give this town its freedom back." They reached the outskirts of Arroyo Verde as the sun was setting, painting the buildings in shades of orange and crimson that made the whole town look like it was already on fire. Cole and Ethan separated, Ethan heading into town to gather the ranchers, while Cole made his way to a small canyon where they'd agreed to meet after dark. While he waited, Cole cleaned his guns, checked his ammunition, and thought about Victor's face when he'd realized his old partner was alive. There had been fear there, yes, but also something else. Relief, maybe. As if part of Victor had been waiting for this moment, had known that betrayal always came due eventually. Or maybe Cole was just seeing what he wanted to see, projecting his own need for redemption onto a man who probably slept soundly despite the blood on his hands. The stars were out in full force when Ethan returned, leading a group of men who moved with the nervous energy of people expecting trouble. There were 11 of them, ranging from grizzled old ranchers who'd been working this land since before Madero's father was born, to young men barely older than Ethan, their faces hard with the kind of anger that came from watching their future stolen. "This is them," Ethan said quietly. "Everyone who still has the stomach for a fight." Cole studied the faces, seeing fear and hope and desperation mixed in equal measure. These weren't soldiers or outlaws. They were farmers and ranchers, men who knew cattle and horses better than they knew guns. But sometimes, when the alternative was slow death through starvation and intimidation, even ordinary men found extraordinary courage. "I'm not going to lie to you," Cole said, his voice carrying clearly in the desert night. "What I'm proposing is dangerous. Some of you might die. Madero has 40 armed men and the law on his side. We have 11 fighters and the element of surprise. Those aren't good odds." "So why should we listen to you?" one of the older ranchers asked. He had a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen too many seasons of disappointment. "Ethan says you're Damon Blake, the outlaw. That true?" "It's true." "Then you're a criminal, a killer. Why should we trust you over Madero?" It was a fair question. Cole could have pointed out that he'd never burned families out of their homes or terrorized workers for sport. He could have argued that there was a difference between robbing banks and destroying lives. But these men didn't need philosophy. They needed results. "Because I'm the only one who's actually stood up to him and lived," Cole said simply. "I shot one of his men in front of a dozen witnesses. I ambushed his best gun in broad daylight. I've done more damage to Madero's operation in 2 days than you've managed in 2 years. So you can trust me, or you can keep bowing and scraping and hoping he shows mercy. But we both know mercy isn't coming." The ranchers exchanged glances, silent communication passing between men who'd known each other for decades. Finally, the old rancher who'd questioned Cole nodded slowly. "What's your plan?" Cole spent the next hour explaining it, sketching maps in the dirt, assigning roles, answering questions. The plan was complex, relying on timing and coordination and a heavy dose of luck, but it was also the only chance they had to break Madero's stranglehold on the territory. When he finished, the ranchers were quiet, processing the magnitude of what he was proposing. Then one by one, they nodded their agreement. They would fight. They would risk everything for a chance at freedom. Because sometimes, Cole thought, The only thing more terrifying than fighting was the prospect of spending the rest of your life on your knees. The meeting broke up near midnight, the ranchers dispersing back to their homes with instructions to prepare supplies and weapons, to be ready to move on a moment's notice. Ethan lingered, helping Cole pack up the maps and notes. "You really think this will work?" the young man asked. "I think we'll find out in 4 days." Cole looked up at the stars, remembering nights like this during his outlaw days, the calm before the storm of violence. "But yeah, kid, I think we've got a shot. And after? If we actually pull this off and Madero's broken, what happens to you?" "I go to Copper Ridge, find Lena, finish what I started." "And then?" Cole didn't have an answer for that. He'd spent 2 years focused entirely on revenge, on finding Victor and Lena and making them pay. He'd never thought about what came after, about who he might be once the rage that sustained him finally burned out. "Then I figure out if there's anything left of Cole Maddox worth saving," he said finally, "or if Damon Blake is all I've got left." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "For what it's worth, I think Cole Maddox is still in there somewhere. Otherwise, you wouldn't be helping us. Blake would have just killed Victor and ridden on." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just using you to get at Madero, same as you're using me to feel important." "Maybe we're using each other," Ethan agreed. "But that doesn't make it wrong. Sometimes the right thing and the selfish thing point in the same direction. Seems stupid not to follow them when they do." Cole smiled despite himself. "You're smarter than you look, kid. Don't have to be that smart to see the obvious." Ethan stood, brushing dust from his pants. "I'm heading back to town. My father will worry if I'm gone all night. You coming?" "Not yet. I need to think." Ethan nodded and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Cole alone with his thoughts and the weight of what was coming. 4 days until the gold shipment. 4 days to prepare, to plan, to gather the courage that would be needed when the shooting started. 4 days until Cole Maddox either freed a town or got everyone who trusted him killed. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses from handling rope and reins, at the scars from fights won and lost. These were killers' hands, forged in violence and tempered by betrayal. But they were also the hands that had helped Ethan stand against Madero's men, that had given hope to ranchers who'd forgotten what hope felt like. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe there was still some fragment of the man he'd been before Victor's betrayal, before the noose, before 2 years of running and hiding and planning revenge. Or maybe that man was gone forever, and all that remained was the ghost wearing his face. Either way, Cole thought, as he finally stood and headed toward his horse, the next 4 days would tell the tale. And when the dust settled and the blood dried, he'd know once and for all whether redemption was possible or if some sins were just too deep to wash away. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust and the promise of violence to come. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the indifferent stars. The 4 days that followed moved with the strange duality of time before battle, simultaneously crawling and racing toward an inevitable collision. Cole spent the daylight hours scouting Madero's compound from a distance, memorizing patrol patterns and guard rotations, counting heads, and cataloging weaknesses. At night, he met with the ranchers in shadowed canyons and abandoned line shacks, refining the plan until every man knew his role and the timing was etched into muscle memory. Ethan proved invaluable, moving between town and the scattered ranches with the ease of someone who'd grown up in this country. He brought information about Madero's preparations for the gold robbery, about which men would be riding out and which would stay behind to guard the compound. Each detail was another piece of the puzzle, another variable that Cole factored into his calculations. On the second day, Cole and Ethan rode to the well that supplied Madero's compound. It sat in a natural depression half a mile from the main buildings, protected by a simple wooden structure and a single guard who spent most of his time sleeping in the shade. The well itself was deep, lined with stone that had been mortared together decades ago when this land belonged to someone else, before Madero's father had claimed it through violence and legal manipulation. "We could poison it," Ethan suggested, studying the setup. "Throw in a dead animal, make the water undrinkable." "Oh, too obvious. They'd figure it out and just dig a new well or haul water from town." Cole circled the structure, examining the wooden beams that supported the winch and bucket system. "We need something more permanent. Something that looks like an accident." "Like what?" Cole knelt beside the well, peering down into the darkness. He could hear water far below, the echo making it impossible to judge the exact depth. The wooden supports were old, weathered by sun and occasional rain, but still solid enough to do their job. However, the crossbeam that held the winch mechanism showed signs of rot where water had splashed and pooled over the years. Like a structural failure, Cole said, standing and brushing dirt from his knees. If that crossbeam were to snap while someone was drawing water, the whole mechanism would collapse into the well, block it completely. They'd have to excavate just to get the debris out before they could even think about using it again. That would take weeks. Exactly. And in the meantime, Madero's 40 men need to drink. He'd have to send crews to the river, establish a supply line, divert resources away from protection and intimidation. Cole smiled grimly. Fear is only effective when you can afford to be everywhere at once. Force him to choose between water and control, and the Empire starts cracking. They spent an hour sabotaging the crossbeam with a subtlety that would make the failure appear natural. Cole used his knife to deepen existing cracks in the wood, working the blade into the grain and prying gently until the structural integrity was compromised. A casual inspection would reveal nothing, but the next time someone put significant weight on the winch system, physics would handle the rest. As they rode back toward their camp, Ethan asked the question that had clearly been bothering him since the ambush in the canyon. You really going after Lena when this is done? Even after what Victor said about her betraying him too? Especially because of that. She betrayed both of us, probably betrayed a dozen other men before us. Someone needs to make her understand that actions have consequences. You gonna kill her? Cole considered the question seriously. He'd killed men before, both during his outlaw days and in the 2 years since the hanging. Men who'd tried to collect the bounty on his head. Men who'd stood between him and escape. Men who'd made the mistake of drawing on someone faster. But he'd never killed a woman, and despite everything Lena had done, the thought sat uneasily in his mind. I don't know, he admitted finally. Maybe just knowing that I found her, that she can't hide from what she did, will be enough. Or maybe when I'm standing in front of her, I'll remember the taste of that cotton gag and the feel of the rope, and I won't be able to stop myself. He glanced at Ethan. Does that bother you? That I don't have it all figured out? No, I think it makes you more honest than most men. People always pretend they know exactly what they'd do in any situation, but the truth is, you never really know until you're there. Ethan paused, then added quietly, I used to think I'd kill Madero if I ever got the chance. Put a bullet in him for Miguel, for the Garcias, for every person he's hurt. But now that we're actually planning this, now that killing him might be a real possibility, I'm not sure I could pull the trigger. You might surprise yourself. Fear and rage can make people capable of things they never imagined. Is that what happened to you? Fear and rage turned you into Damon Blake? No. Damon Blake was always there, I think, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. Cole's hand drifted unconsciously to the rope scar on his neck. Before Victor's betrayal, I kept him buried under ideas about honor and loyalty. After the hanging, there wasn't any reason to pretend anymore. The world showed me its true face, so I showed it mine. They rode in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The desert stretched around them, vast and indifferent, a landscape that had witnessed countless acts of violence and virtue and everything in between. It would still be here long after Cole and Ethan and Madero were dust, still baking under the same merciless sun, still keeping its secrets. That night, Cole met with the ranchers again. This time, the gathering was larger. Word had spread despite efforts at secrecy, and men who'd been too frightened to attend the first meeting now showed up, drawn by rumors that someone was actually fighting back. The old rancher who'd questioned Cole at that initial meeting stood at the front of the group, his weathered face set in grim determination. We heard what you did to the well, he said without preamble. Smart. Madero's already scrambling, sending men to figure out alternative water sources. The compound's in chaos. Good. That means they're distracted, off balance. Perfect time to hit them where else they're weak. Cole unrolled a map he'd drawn from memory and observation, weighted down with rocks on the corners. The gold shipment comes through Blackwater Canyon in 2 days. Madero's committing 25 men to that robbery, more than half his force. That leaves maybe 15 at the compound, and those will be his least experienced fighters. The good ones go where the money is. So we hit the compound while he's at the canyon, someone asked. No, we make him think we're going to hit the compound, force him to split his attention even further. Cole traced a line on the map. There's a line shack on the southern edge of his territory, just across the property line from your ranch, Martinez. Madero uses it to store supplies and as a waypoint for patrols. If that shack were to catch fire the morning of the robbery, visible for miles, what would Madero do? Martinez, a stocky man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, understood immediately. He'd have to send men to investigate. Can't ignore a fire on his own land, especially if he thinks it might be a signal for a larger attack. Exactly. So now he's got 25 men committed to the gold, another 5 or 6 rushing toward the fire, and maybe 8 left to guard the compound. Cole's finger moved across the map to a different location, which is when the rest of us move on his cattle. Confusion rippled through the gathered men. The cattle? Ethan asked. What good does stealing his cattle do? We're not stealing them. We're stampeding them. Cole's smile was sharp and cold. Madero's wealth is built on 3 things: land, water, and livestock. We're taking away his water by sabotaging the well. We're forcing him to spread his men thin by creating multiple threats. And we're destroying his immediate wealth by scattering 500 head of cattle across 50 miles of desert. Even if he recovers half of them, he'll spend months rounding up the rest. Months when he can't pay his men, can't maintain his influence, can't project the strength that keeps people afraid. Understanding dawned across the faces around him, followed by something Cole hadn't expected. Hope. Real, tangible hope. That maybe, just maybe, they could actually hurt the man who'd been hurting them for so long. The timing has to be perfect, Cole continued. The fire starts at dawn. Madero splits his remaining forces. We move on the cattle an hour later, just enough time for confusion to set in, but not enough for him to reorganize. We hit the herd fast and hard, use gunfire and noise to spook them, then get out before anyone can respond effectively. And what about you? The old rancher asked. Where will you be while we're stampeding cattle? At Blackwater Canyon, making sure Madero's robbery doesn't go as planned. The words dropped into the gathering like a stone into still water, ripples of shock spreading outward. You're going to stop the robbery? Someone asked. Alone? Not alone. Ethan's coming with me. Cole glanced at the young man who looked simultaneously terrified and thrilled by the prospect. We're not going to stop it entirely. We're going to make it messy, complicated. Turn what should be a simple ambush into something that costs Madero more than he gains. That's suicide, Martinez said flatly. You'll be outnumbered 25-2. 25-2 assumes all 25 are focused on us, but they won't be. They'll be focused on the gold, on the federal soldiers guarding it, on securing the shipment. We'll just be ghosts in the rocks, making noise at the worst possible moments. And if you're wrong, if they catch you... Cole's hand touched the rope scar. Won't be the first time someone tried to hang me. Didn't take then, probably won't take now. The ranchers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They'd expected a coordinated attack on weakened defenses, not a multi-pronged assault that relied on chaos and split-second timing. But Cole could see the calculation happening behind their eyes, the weighing of risk against potential reward. Finally, the old rancher nodded. We'll do it. Stampede the cattle, create the diversion. But if you get yourself killed in that canyon, don't expect us to avenge you. We're not soldiers. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be men who refuse to live on their knees anymore. Cole began rolling up the map. 2 days. Get your families somewhere safe, gather your weapons, and be ready to move fast. After this, Madero will either be broken or he'll come at us with everything he has left. There's no middle ground. The meeting dispersed slowly, men drifting off into the darkness to prepare for what might be their last stand. Ethan lingered, helping Cole gather the maps and supplies. You really think this will work? The young man asked for what felt like the 100th time. I think we're about to find out if luck and desperation are enough to beat money and firepower. Cole hefted his saddlebags. But I've survived on worse odds before. They rode back to their camp in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than before, charged with anticipation rather than uncertainty. The die was cast, the pieces moving into position. In 48 hours, everything would change one way or another. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. Cole and Ethan made one last reconnaissance of Blackwater Canyon, identifying positions where they could observe the gold shipment without being seen, planning escape routes for when things inevitably went wrong. The canyon was a natural choke point, walls of red stone rising hundreds of feet on either side of a narrow passage barely wide enough for a wagon, perfect for an ambush, which was exactly why Madero had chosen it. "He'll position men on the rim," Cole observed, studying the canyon walls through borrowed binoculars. "High ground gives them advantage against the soldiers below. Probably have another group waiting at the far end to block escape. Classic pincer movement. Where does that leave us?" "Somewhere they're not looking. Behind them, maybe, or tucked into one of those side passages." Cole lowered the binoculars. "The key is to wait until they're committed, until the shooting's already started and everyone's focused on killing each other. That's when we make our move." "What move exactly? You still haven't explained that part." Cole smiled. "Because I'm still figuring it out. Sometimes the best plans are the ones you make up as you go." That evening, as the sun bled crimson across the western sky, Victor Hale returned to Madero's compound. Cole watched from a distant ridge as the wounded man was helped off his horse, his legs still bandaged and his face pale from fever. Madero himself came out to meet him, and even from this distance, Cole could read the fury in the cattle baron's body language. Victor had talked, just as Cole had known he would. Desperate men always talked, spilling secrets in exchange for the illusion of safety. And now Madero knew that someone was aware of his gold shipment plan, knew that Cole Maddox, or Damon Blake, the distinction probably didn't matter anymore, was hunting him. "He'll be paranoid now," Cole said quietly to Ethan, who crouched beside him. "Seeing threats everywhere, trusting no one. That's good for us. Paranoid men make mistakes. Or they become more dangerous because they're unpredictable. That too." They watched as Victor was carried into the main house, Madero following close behind. The compound was already showing signs of stress, men hurrying between buildings, raised voices carrying across the distance, the organized chaos of an operation under pressure. The well sabotage had worked better than Cole had hoped, forcing Madero to establish water details that pulled men away from other duties. "Tomorrow," Cole said, more to himself than to Ethan, "tomorrow everything changes." That night, sleep came hard and fitful, filled with dreams of nooses and falling and the moment of impact when the rope snapped. Cole woke several times, hand reaching for his gun, before he remembered where he was. Beside him, Ethan tossed and turned, making small noises that suggested his own dreams were equally troubled. Just before dawn, Cole gave up on sleep entirely and moved to sit on a rock overlooking the valley. The stars were fading, the sky shifting from black to deep blue to the first hints of purple and orange. Somewhere out there, Martinez and the other ranchers were preparing to light a fire that would be seen for miles. Somewhere out there, Madero's men were saddling horses and checking weapons for the ride to Blackwater Canyon. And somewhere out there, a shipment of federal gold was rolling inexorably toward a rendezvous with violence. "Couldn't sleep either," Ethan's voice came from behind him. "Sleep's overrated. So is breathing, if you think about it too hard." Ethan settled beside him, young face serious in the pre-dawn light. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not knowing if you'll kill Lena when you find her, about how you can't predict what you'll do until you're actually there." "Yeah? I think I understand it better now. Before this, before you showed up, I thought I knew exactly who I was. The rancher's son who wanted more, who was angry about Miguel, who'd fight if given the chance. But now that the fighting's actually here, I'm realizing I don't know anything. Don't know if I'm brave or just stupid. Don't know if I can actually pull the trigger when it matters. Don't even know if I'll survive to find out." Cole was quiet for a moment, watching the sun break over the eastern hills. "You want to know a secret? Nobody knows. Not really. We all tell ourselves stories about who we are and what we do, but until the moment arrives, it's all just guessing." He turned to look at Ethan. "The only difference between brave and stupid is whether you survive. And even that's mostly luck. That's not exactly inspiring. Wasn't trying to inspire you. Was trying to be honest." Cole stood, offering his hand to pull Ethan up. "But if it helps, I've seen you stand up to Madero's men when you should have run. Seen you risk your life for a stranger. Seen you organize frightened ranchers into something resembling a fighting force. Whatever you end up doing today, I don't think it'll be because you're stupid. They broke camp as the sun rose fully, transforming the desert into a furnace of light and heat. By the time they'd saddled their horses and gathered their weapons, smoke was visible on the southern horizon, the line shack burning right on schedule. Martinez and his men had done their part. Cole and Ethan rode toward Blackwater Canyon, taking a route that kept them off the main trails and away from Madero's men. The journey took 3 hours, the sun climbing higher with each mile, heat radiating off the rocks in visible waves. By the time they reached the canyon, both men and horses were soaked with sweat. They approached from the north, leaving their mounts hidden in a small box canyon before proceeding on foot. Cole had his rifle and pistol, plus spare ammunition and a hunting knife that had served him well in tight situations. Ethan carried his own weapons with the nervous energy of someone about to test themselves in ways they'd never imagined. The canyon stretched before them, a slash of shadow cutting through sun-blasted stone. Cole could already see Madero's men taking up positions along the rim, dark shapes moving against the bright sky. He counted carefully. 23 visible, which meant at least 2 more were hidden or stationed at the far end as blockers. "They're early," Ethan whispered. "Doesn't the gold shipment arrive around noon?" "Madero's paranoid, remember? He wants his men in position with plenty of time to prepare." Cole studied the layout, his tactical mind processing angles and distances. "See that outcropping about halfway up the north wall? The one that looks like a finger pointing at the sky?" "Yeah." "We can reach it from behind, climb up without being seen. Gives us a view of the whole canyon and puts us above most of Madero's shooters." "And when the shooting starts?" "We improvise." They spent the next hour working their way around the canyon's rim to the outcropping Cole had identified. The climb was treacherous, loose rock and narrow ledges that would send them plummeting to their deaths with one wrong step. But Cole had climbed worse in his outlaw days, had learned to trust his hands and feet and the strength of stone that had been standing for millennia. When they finally reached the outcropping, both men were breathing hard and sporting fresh cuts from sharp rocks. But the position was everything Cole had hoped for, a natural fortress that overlooked the entire ambush site while remaining hidden from below. "Now we wait," Cole said, settling into a comfortable position with his rifle. The gold shipment arrived just after noon, announced by the rumble of wagon wheels and the clopping of hooves echoing off canyon walls. Cole watched through his rifle scope as 6 federal soldiers rode escort around a reinforced freight wagon. The soldiers looked young and nervous, hands never far from their weapons, eyes constantly scanning the rim for threats they couldn't see but clearly suspected. The wagon entered the canyon at a cautious pace, the driver clearly unhappy about being in such a perfect killing ground. 50 yards in, 100, still nothing. The soldiers began to relax fractionally, thinking maybe their intelligence about a robbery attempt had been wrong. Then Madero's men opened fire. The canyon exploded with gunshots, the sound amplified and distorted by stone walls until it was impossible to tell how many shooters there were or where they were firing from. The soldiers returned fire immediately, but they were shooting at shadows and muzzle flashes while Madero's men had clear targets below. 2 soldiers fell in the first 30 seconds, bodies crumpling from their horses. The wagon driver tried to turn the team around, but there wasn't enough room in the narrow passage. The remaining soldiers dismounted, using their horses as cover while they tried to locate their attackers. It was a massacre in the making, exactly as Madero had planned. Cole sighted down his rifle, finger on the trigger, waiting for the right moment. Beside him, Ethan was pale but steady, his own rifle tracking targets. "Not yet," Cole murmured. "Wait until they commit." More of Madero's men revealed themselves, moving down from the rim to secure the wagon. The federal soldiers were putting up a better fight than expected, but they were outnumbered and outpositioned. It was only a matter of time before they were overrun. "Now," Cole said, and fired. His bullet took one of Madero's men high on the north wall, the impact sending the man tumbling backward with a scream that was audible even over the gunfire. Ethan fired a second later, his shot going wide but forcing another of Madero's shooters to duck for cover. Confusion rippled through the ambush. Madero's men had been expecting to fight soldiers, not get shot at from behind by unknown attackers. Some wheeled around trying to locate the new threat, while others continued focusing on the wagon. The coordinated assault fractured into chaos. Cole worked his rifle with methodical precision, not trying to kill but to create confusion and fear. A shot that ricocheted off rock near someone's head, another that shattered a water canteen, a third that knocked a hat off someone who'd thought he was safely hidden. Each shot was a message. You're not safe, you're being hunted, nowhere is secure. The federal soldiers, recognizing that something had shifted in their favor, pressed their advantage. They concentrated their fire on the men trying to reach the wagon, dropping 3 in quick succession. The tide of battle was turning, the guaranteed victory becoming a costly struggle. "We need to move," Cole said, already backing away from the outcropping. "They'll figure out where we are soon, and this position becomes a trap." They scrambled down from the outcropping, moving laterally along the canyon wall toward a new position. Behind them, bullets started chewing into the rock where they'd been moments before. Someone had spotted them. Cole and Ethan reached a narrow crevice barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Cole went first, rifle held high, Ethan following close behind. The crevice opened into a small chamber carved by ancient water, with a narrow opening that overlooked a different section of the canyon. From this new vantage point, Cole could see Madero himself, recognizable by his expensive clothes and the silver-trimmed sombrero. The cattle baron was shouting orders, trying to restore coordination to an ambush that had descended into anarchy. Some of his men were still engaging the soldiers, but others had turned their attention to finding the hidden shooters who'd disrupted everything. "He's exposed," Ethan breathed. "You could take the shot." Cole's crosshairs settled on Madero's chest. One squeeze of the trigger, and the man who'd terrorized Arroyo Verde would be dead. Justice delivered with 700 grains of lead traveling at 1,500 feet per second. But killing Madero wasn't the plan. Dead martyrs could become symbols, rallying points for the men who survived. Broken and humiliated leaders who lost everything were forgotten, discarded by the same people who'd once followed them. Cole shifted his aim slightly and fired. The bullet took Madero's horse in the flank, a non-fatal wound, but painful enough to make the animal rear violently. Madero was thrown from the saddle, landing hard in the dirt, his expensive hat tumbling away. The symbol of invincibility shattered in front of his own men. Madero scrambled to his feet, face contorted with rage and pain, screaming for someone to find the shooters, kill them, make them pay. But his men were scattered, disorganized, caught between the surviving soldiers and the ghosts in the rocks who kept shooting from impossible angles. "Time to go," Cole said. "We've done enough damage." They retreated through the crevice, moving as fast as the narrow passage allowed. Behind them, gunfire continued to echo off canyon walls, but it was sporadic now, lacking the concentrated fury of the initial ambush. Madero's men were breaking, some fleeing toward their horses, others trying to salvage what they could from the failed robbery. Cole and Ethan reached their horses and mounted in fluid motions born from practice and adrenaline. As they rode away from Blackwater Canyon, Cole allowed himself a small smile. The gold shipment would make it through, probably escorted by whatever federal soldiers had survived. Madero had committed his best men and come away with nothing but casualties and humiliation, and somewhere to the south, 500 head of cattle were stampeding across the desert, scattering Madero's wealth to the four winds. "We did it," Ethan said, disbelief and exhilaration mixing in his voice. "We actually did it. We disrupted the robbery. We survived. We bought time," Cole corrected, but his tone wasn't harsh. "This isn't over. Madero's wounded, but wounded animals are the most dangerous kind. He'll come back at us with everything he has left, and when he does, we need to be ready." They rode hard for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and any pursuit. Then they slowed to a sustainable pace, letting the horses recover while they processed what had just happened. The sun was sliding toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and crimson. "What do you think the ranchers managed?" Ethan asked. "If they followed the plan, Madero's cattle are scattered from here to the next territory. Even if he recovers half of them, he's lost a fortune in value and time." Cole adjusted his hat against the glare. "Between the well, the fire, the cattle, and the failed robbery, we've cut him off at the knees. Not killed him, but crippled him enough that he can't maintain control. So what happens now?" Cole considered the question. The logical next step was to press the advantage, hit Madero again while he was reeling, finish the job they'd started. But Cole's personal war wasn't with Madero. It was with Victor and Lena. He'd helped these people as a way to get at Victor, and that debt was paid. Victor was wounded and humiliated, living with the knowledge that the man he'd betrayed had returned from the dead to destroy everything he'd built. But Lena was still out there, still comfortable and safe in Copper Ridge, still believing she'd gotten away with betrayal. "Now I finish what I started," Cole said finally. "Victor's dealt with. Madero's crippled. The people of Arroyo Verde have a fighting chance. My work here is done. You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "Tomorrow. Maybe the day after, depending on how hard Madero comes at us tonight." Ethan was quiet, and Cole could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. The kid had proven himself in the canyon, had stood steady when men twice his age would have broken. He'd earned the right to his disappointment. "You could stay," Ethan said finally. "Help us finish this. Make sure Madero doesn't rise back up." "You don't need me for that. You've got the ranchers organized, you've proven you can fight, and Madero's men are going to start deserting once word spreads about the failed robbery. Fear works both ways, remember? They followed him because he was strong. Now that he's weak, they'll scatter like roaches when the light comes on." "And what about Victor? He's still at the compound, still dangerous." "Victor's a coward who's bleeding from a bullet wound I gave him. He's not the threat anymore. If you want him dead, you've got the guns and the numbers to make it happen." Cole paused. "But my advice? Let him live. Let him watch while everything Madero built collapses, while the man he attached himself to falls into nothing. That's worse than a bullet." They rode in silence for another mile before Ethan spoke again. "This Lena woman, the one in Copper Ridge, what are you going to do when you find her?" "I told you before, I don't know." "Yeah, but you've had time to think about it now. Time to plan. You always have a plan." Cole smiled despite himself. "You know me too well, kid. All right, truth? I'm going to walk into her saloon and let her see my face. Let her understand that the dead don't stay buried, and betrayal doesn't stay buried either. After that?" He shrugged. "After that, we'll see what kind of person I am when the rage finally has nowhere left to go." The stars were emerging when they finally approached their camp, and Cole immediately knew something was wrong. The horses caught the scent first, ears pricking forward and nostrils flaring. Then Cole saw the shapes moving in the darkness. Men on horseback, at least a dozen of them, surrounding the small canyon where he and Ethan had been staying. "It's a trap," Ethan hissed, reaching for his gun. "No. It's a reckoning." Cole recognized the lead rider even in the dim light. Madero sat his horse with the rigid posture of a man in pain, his expensive clothes torn and dusty from being thrown. Behind him, what remained of his force sat their mounts, weapons drawn and faces hard with fury. They'd been waiting, knowing Cole would return here, and now there was nowhere to run. Cole's mind raced through possibilities with the cold efficiency of a man who'd spent 2 years calculating survival odds. 12 men, maybe more hidden in the rocks. 2 exits from this canyon, both now blocked. Ammunition enough for a fight, but not a prolonged siege. Horses tired from the day's hard riding. The mathematics of the situation painted a simple picture. They were trapped. "Easy," Madero called out, his voice carrying the brittle edge of barely controlled fury. "Both of you, hands where I can see them, nice and slow. Any sudden moves and my men will cut you down before you clear leather." Cole raised his hands slowly, Ethan following his lead. Their horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension crackling through the air like heat lightning before a storm. Madero urged his mount forward, close enough that Cole could see the bruises on his face from the fall, the way he favored his left side where he'd probably cracked ribs. The cattle baron's eyes burned with a hatred that transcended simple anger. This was the look of a man whose entire world had been kicked out from under him in a single day. "You cost me everything," Madero said, each word measured and precise. "The gold shipment failed. My cattle scattered across 50 miles. My well sabotaged. My reputation destroyed in front of my own men. All because of one ghost who should have stayed dead and a stupid kid who didn't know when to mind his own business." "Your reputation was built on fear and violence," Cole replied evenly. "Can't complain when someone uses the same tools against you." I can when that someone is a dead outlaw and a rancher's boy who thinks he's a revolutionary." Madero's smile was cold. "Do you know what I did after the canyon? After you humiliated me in front of 23 men who follow me because they believe I'm invincible?" Cole said nothing, waiting. "I had Victor Hale brought before me. The man you wounded. The man who told me you were coming. Who promised he knew how you thought and could predict your moves. Madero's smile widened. I put a bullet in his head myself, because if there's one thing I learned from you, Mr. Blake, it's that weakness cannot be tolerated. And Victor's weakness led you straight to my door. The words hit Cole like a physical blow. Victor, dead. The man he'd spent 2 years hunting, the man who'd put a noose around his neck, the man who deserved to suffer for every moment of betrayal, gone. Killed not by Cole's hand, but by Madero's need to reassert dominance. Something twisted in Cole's chest, an emotion he couldn't quite name. It wasn't grief. Victor had earned his death 100 times over. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something else, something that felt like a door slamming shut on a room he'd been trying to reach for too long. You're lying, Cole said, but even to his own ears the words lacked conviction. Am I? You want proof? Madero gestured to one of his men who rode forward leading a second horse. Draped over the saddle was a body wrapped in canvas, but one arm had come loose, hanging limply. Cole recognized the silver ring on the third finger, Victor's lucky charm, bought with money from their first bank robbery together. The proof was undeniable. I thought about keeping him alive, Madero continued, his voice almost conversational now, using him as bait to draw you in. But then I realized you don't need bait. You came back here on your own, predictable as sunrise, because men like you always return to familiar ground when they're hunted. It's your weakness, Blake. You think you're smarter than everyone else, but you follow patterns just like any other animal. And now what? Ethan asked, his voice tight with fear but still steady. You shoot us both and reclaim your empire built on ashes? Eventually. But first I think you both deserve to understand exactly what your little rebellion has cost. Madero's expression hardened. You wanted to free Arroyo Verde from my control? Congratulations. By dawn tomorrow, half the town will be burning. Every ranch that participated in your cattle stampede will be razed to the ground. Every man who stood against me will watch his family suffer before I put bullets in their skulls. And you two will be alive just long enough to know it's your fault. Cole felt Ethan tense beside him, the kid's hand drifting toward his gun, despite the rifles pointed at them. Don't, Cole said quietly. Not yet. Listen to your friend, Madero said. He's at least smart enough to recognize when he's beaten, though not quite smart enough to avoid getting caught in the first place. You talk too much, Cole observed. Man who's truly won doesn't need to explain it. Madero's face darkened. Bind them, hands behind their backs. And if either of them so much as twitches wrong, shoot the other one first. Let's see how brave they are when they have to watch each other die. Two of Madero's men dismounted, approaching with rope. Cole measured the distance, calculated the angles, and reluctantly admitted to himself that Madero was right. They were beaten. 12 guns trained on them. No cover. Horses too tired to run. Sometimes the mathematics were simple, and fighting just meant dying faster. The ropes bit into Cole's wrists, pulled tight enough to restrict blood flow. Beside him, Ethan was similarly bound, the young man's face pale, but his jaw set with stubborn defiance. They were hauled off their horses and forced to the ground, knees in the dirt, execution style. You know what the irony is? Madero said, dismounting carefully and limping toward them. If you'd just left after shooting Diego in my cantina, none of this would have happened. You could have ridden north to find your precious Lena Marquez. Yes, Victor told me about her before he died, and I would have forgotten about you within a week. But you had to be a hero. Had to stand up for people too weak to stand up for themselves. Better than being a coward who preys on the powerless, Ethan spat. Madero backhanded him casually, the impact snapping Ethan's head sideways and drawing blood from his lip. The powerless exist to be preyed upon. That's the natural order. The strong take what they want, the weak submit or die. You could have been strong, boy. Could have joined me instead of this dead man walking. Now, you'll just be another corpse feeding the vultures. Cole's mind was still racing, still looking for angles that didn't exist. The ropes were too tight to slip, the guards too alert to catch off balance. But there had to be something, some variable he was missing, some weakness in Madero's position that could be exploited. Then he heard it, distant at first but growing steadily louder, the sound of horses approaching at a gallop. Multiple riders, moving fast. Madero heard it too, his expression shifting from triumph to confusion to alarm in the space of a heartbeat. Garrett, take 5 men and see who's coming. If it's more of Blake's friends, kill them before they get close. Garrett, the man Cole had humiliated in the cantina days earlier, spurred his horse toward the canyon entrance, 5 riders following. The remaining men tightened their circle around Cole and Ethan, weapons ready, tension ratcheting higher. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Silence fell, thick and expectant. Then gunfire erupted, the distinctive crack of rifles echoing off canyon walls. Garrett's voice rose above the chaos, shouting orders that were cut off mid-sentence by a scream. Madero's men exchanged uncertain glances. Their employer barked orders, trying to maintain control, but Cole could see the fear beginning to creep into their expressions. They'd already lost the gold shipment, already watched their boss get thrown from his horse like a common cowhand. How much more failure would they tolerate before self-preservation trumped loyalty? 3 of Garrett's riders came galloping back, one of them bleeding from a shoulder wound. "It's the ranchers," he shouted. "Martinez, the old man, maybe 20 others. They're armed and they're not running." 20 farmers with squirrel guns, Madero snarled. "Kill them all." But his men weren't moving with the confidence they'd shown earlier. They'd signed up to intimidate and collect protection money, not to fight an organized resistance. The day's disasters had already shaken their faith in Madero's invincibility. Now, faced with an actual battle against men defending their homes, that faith was crumbling visibly. The standoff broke when Martinez himself rode into view at the canyon entrance, the old rancher sitting his horse with the calm authority of a man who'd already made peace with dying. Behind him, Cole could see the others, weathered faces, hardened eyes, weapons held steady. These weren't farmers anymore. They were men who'd finally decided that death on their feet was preferable to life on their knees. "Rafael Madero," Martinez's voice carried clearly. "We're done. Done with your taxes, done with your threats, done with watching you bleed this land dry. You want to burn our ranches? You'll have to kill every one of us first, and I'm thinking your men aren't quite as eager for that fight as you are." Madero's face contorted with rage. "You old fool! You think numbers matter? I'll hang you from your own barn and make your family watch." "You'll try." Martinez's rifle came up smoothly, aimed at Madero's chest. "But I'm thinking maybe your boys aren't as committed to dying for you as they were this morning. Not after the canyon, not after watching you get knocked in the dirt like any other man." Cole watched the calculation happening in the faces of Madero's men. They were outnumbered now, 6 of them against 20 ranchers, with 2 prisoners who'd turn on them the moment they got free. The mathematics had shifted, and mathematics didn't care about reputation or fear or how much you paid your hired guns. One of Madero's men, a lean rider with a scar on his cheek, lowered his rifle. "I didn't sign up for this, boss. Didn't sign up to fight a war." "You signed up to follow my orders," Madero's voice cracked with desperation. "I signed up for easy money. This ain't easy anymore." The scarred man holstered his weapon and turned his horse toward the canyon exit. "I'm out. Anybody else with sense should be too." The dam broke. 3 more of Madero's men followed, riding past Martinez and the ranchers without looking back. That left only 2 loyalists, both of them looking at their employer with expressions that mixed fear and uncertainty. "Cowards!" Madero screamed at the departing riders. "I'll hunt you down. I'll kill your families. You'll do nothing," Martinez interrupted calmly. "Because you're finished, Rafael. Your men are deserting, your money's scattered, your reputation's in ruins. You got 2 choices now: ride away while you still can, or die in this canyon next to the men you tried to execute." For a long moment, nobody moved. Madero stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too fast to track: rage, disbelief, calculation, fear. The 2 men still with him waited for orders that didn't come, their horses dancing nervously. Then Madero's hand dropped toward his gun. Martinez fired first, the shot deliberate and precise. The bullet took Madero in the thigh, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. His silver-trimmed sombrero fell off, rolling away in the dust. The 2 remaining loyalists reached for their weapons, but a volley from the ranchers convinced them otherwise. They raised their hands in surrender, smart enough to recognize when a cause was lost. Martinez rode forward slowly, his rifle never wavering from Madero's hunched form. The cattle baron clutched his leg, blood seeping between his fingers, his face contorted with pain and humiliation. "You made a mistake," Martinez said quietly. You thought power came from fear, but fear only works until someone stops being afraid. And we stopped being afraid the day Cole Maddox rode into town and showed us what one man with courage could do. He gestured to one of the other ranchers who dismounted and cut Cole's bonds. Sensation flooded back into Cole's hands in a rush of pins and needles. Ethan was freed next, the young man rubbing his wrists and staring at Martinez with something approaching awe. "How did you know?" Cole asked, working feeling back into his fingers. "We didn't. But after the cattle stampede worked better than any of us expected, we figured Madero would come after you, so we rode here instead of going home." Martinez's weathered face creased in something that might have been a smile. Seemed like the least we could do for the man who gave us our spines back. Cole looked at the assembled ranchers, 20 men who'd risked everything on the slim chance they could make a difference. Men who'd been beaten down for so long they'd forgotten what standing tall felt like. And now here they were, armed and dangerous, and finally free. "What do we do with him?" one of the younger ranchers asked, gesturing at Madero, who was still kneeling in the dirt. "Let him go," Cole said. Shock rippled through the group. Ethan stared at him like he'd gone insane. After everything he's done? After he tried to kill us, threatened to burn the town? After all that, he's nothing, just a broken man with a bullet wound and no army. Cole walked over to where Madero knelt, looking down at the man who'd terrorized an entire territory. He'll limp to the next town, try to rebuild, maybe convince himself he can reclaim what he lost. But he can't. Everyone knows he was beaten by farmers and a dead outlaw. Word will spread, and everywhere he goes for the rest of his life, he'll be the man who lost everything to people he thought were beneath him. Cole leaned down, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "That's worse than death, Raphael. Death would make you a martyr, a cautionary tale, maybe even a legend. But this? Living with the knowledge that you were broken by the very people you tried to break? That's a special kind of hell." Madero's eyes burned with hatred, but beneath it, Cole saw something else. Understanding. Recognition that Cole was right, that this humiliation would follow him forever. "Get him out of here," Cole said, straightening. "Give him a horse and send him east. If he's smart, he'll keep riding until the territory's just a bad memory." 2 ranchers hauled Madero to his feet and half-carried him to a horse. The cattle baron didn't speak, didn't threaten, didn't even look back as they led him toward the canyon exit. He was already a ghost, already erased from the land he'd once ruled. The 2 surrendered loyalists were disarmed and sent after him, stripped of their weapons and their certainty. They'd find work somewhere else, probably tell stories about the day they watched an empire fall. But those stories would be told in whispers, in places where nobody knew their shame. As Madero disappeared into the darkness beyond the canyon, Ethan moved to stand beside Cole. "I don't understand. Victor's dead. Madero's broken. But you don't look satisfied. You look empty." Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring at the space where Victor's body lay wrapped in canvas. "I spent 2 years building toward this moment. 2 years of hunting and planning and imagining what I'd say when I finally caught the man who betrayed me, what I'd do, how it would feel. And it doesn't feel like anything. Victor's dead, but I didn't kill him. Madero's defeated, but it was the ranchers who made the final stand. I'm standing here with everything I wanted accomplished, and all I feel is," he paused, searching for the word, "hollow." "Maybe that's because revenge was never going to be enough," Martinez said, approaching quietly. "You came here for vengeance, but what you gave us was hope. Maybe that's what you were really after all along, a reason to be someone other than the man they hung in Silver Creek." Cole looked at the old rancher, seeing wisdom earned through hard years and harder choices. "Maybe. Or maybe I just don't know who I am anymore when I'm not chasing ghosts. Then figure it out somewhere else. You've done enough here." Martinez extended his hand. "Whatever happens next, Arroyo Verde won't forget what you started. We'll finish it properly, rebuild, reorganize, make sure nobody like Madero ever takes root here again. But that's our work now, not yours." Cole shook the offered hand, feeling the strength in the old man's grip. "What about Victor's body?" "We'll see. He gets buried. Even bastards deserve that much." Martinez glanced at Ethan. "And this one? He's staying or going with you?" All eyes turned to Ethan, who stood silhouetted against the rising moon. The young man looked between Cole and the assembled ranchers, clearly torn between the adventure of riding with an outlaw and the responsibility of helping rebuild his home. "I should stay," Ethan said finally. "My father, the ranch, everything I said about wanting to be important, it's all here. I can't chase importance somewhere else when it's waiting for me to claim it right here." Cole nodded, unsurprised. "You'll do good work. Just remember, being important means being a target. People will challenge you, test you, try to take what you've built. Don't let them." "I won't. You taught me that much at least." Ethan's grin was bittersweet. "Where will you go?" "North, Copper Ridge. I've got one ghost left to confront." "And after that?" Cole looked up at the stars, at the vast indifference of the universe spread above them. "I don't know. Maybe that's the point. Maybe I spend so long planning revenge that I forgot how to just live." "Then learn," Ethan said simply. "You survived a hanging, dismantled an empire, gave a town its freedom back. If you can do all that, you can figure out how to be human again." The ranchers began dispersing, mounting their horses and heading back toward town in small groups. Tomorrow, there would be work to do, damage to assess, plans to make, a future to build from the rubble of Madero's regime. But tonight was for rest and reflection and the simple joy of knowing they'd won. Cole and Ethan stood alone as the last of the ranchers rode out. The canyon was quiet now, just wind and stone and the faint sound of horses' hooves fading into distance. "You ever scared?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Of what comes next, I mean. Of not knowing who you are or where you're going?" "Every damn day," Cole admitted. "But I've learned that fear just means you're still alive enough to care. It's when you stop being scared that you should worry." "That's not particularly comforting." "Wasn't meant to be. Was meant to be honest." Cole moved toward his horse, checking the saddle cinch and saddlebags. "You did good today, kid. Better than good. You stood when others would have run, fought when others would have hidden. Miguel would have been proud." Ethan's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "Thank you. For everything. For showing up, for fighting, for giving us a chance when nobody else would." "I didn't do it for you. Did it because Victor and Madero gave me a reason to hurt them both. You just happened to benefit." "You keep telling yourself that. Maybe one day you'll even believe it." Ethan offered his hand. "Safe travels, Cole Maddox. Or Damon Blake. Whoever you decide to be." Cole shook his hand firmly, feeling the calluses of honest work, the grip of someone who'd earned his strength through perseverance rather than violence. "You too, Ethan Cruz. Build something worth protecting, then protect it with everything you've got." They stood there for a moment longer, two men who'd shared danger and triumph and the strange intimacy that comes from facing death together. Then Ethan turned and walked to his horse, mounting with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "Hey, Cole," he called as he prepared to ride out. "Yeah?" "When you find Lena, when you're standing there trying to decide what to do, remember that forgiveness isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do." Cole didn't respond, didn't trust his voice. Ethan seemed to understand. He touched his hat in farewell and rode toward the canyon exit, toward home and responsibility and the future he'd fought to claim. Alone now, Cole walked over to where Victor's body lay across the horse. He pulled back the canvas, looking at the face of the man who'd once been his partner, his friend, the person he'd trusted most in the world. Death had smoothed away some of the lines of cruelty and fear, leaving Victor looking younger than he had in life. "I wanted to kill you myself," Cole said quietly to the corpse. "Wanted to look in your eyes and watch you understand what you'd done, what it cost. But maybe this is better. Maybe dying at Madero's hand, just another piece of collateral damage in someone else's war, is exactly what you deserved. No glory, no final stand, just a bullet from a man who cared about you even less than you cared about anyone." He covered Victor's face again, turning away from the body and the past it represented. Martinez's men would see to the burial, would put Victor in the ground where he belonged. Cole's work here was finished. He mounted his horse, feeling the familiar creak of leather and the solid warmth of the animal beneath him. The north beckoned, and with it, Copper Ridge and the final confrontation he'd been building toward. Lena Marquez was out there somewhere, probably sleeping soundly, believing herself safe from the consequences of old betrayals. But as Cole rode out of the canyon into the vast darkness of the desert night, He found himself thinking about Ethan's parting words. Forgiveness. The idea sat uncomfortably in his mind, foreign and strange after 2 years of nurturing hatred and rage. Could he forgive Lena? Could he look at the woman who'd kissed him goodbye and then sold him to federal agents who'd smiled while fitting a noose around his neck and simply let it go? The question followed him through the night, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the desert stretched endlessly in all directions. And Cole Maddox rode north toward a reckoning whose outcome he could no longer predict. Behind him, Arroyo Verde was sleeping the sleep of the freed, dreaming of tomorrows that didn't include fear. Somewhere ahead, Lena Marquez was living a life built on blood money and betrayal. And somewhere in between, Cole was trying to figure out which version of himself would arrive when he finally found her. The vengeful ghost of Damon Blake, or the man who'd once believed in justice and mercy and second chances. The horse's steady rhythm ate up the miles, each hoofbeat carrying him farther from the life he'd known and closer to the life he'd have to choose. And for the first time in 2 years, Cole allowed himself to consider that maybe, just maybe, revenge wasn't the ending he'd been riding toward. Maybe it was just the beginning of figuring out who Cole Maddox could be if he stopped being defined by what others had taken from him. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, and it followed him into the darkness like a shadow he could never quite outrun. 3 days of hard riding brought Cole to the edge of Copper Ridge as autumn painted the northern mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The mining town clung to the hillside like a barnacle, a collection of rough timber buildings and canvas tents that had sprung up wherever silver veins promised fortune. Smoke rose from 100 chimneys, and even from a distance, Cole could hear the sounds of industry, hammers on rock, the rumble of ore carts, the shouts of men who'd traded safety for the possibility of wealth. He'd spent those 3 days wrestling with Ethan's words about forgiveness, turning them over in his mind like a coin he couldn't decide whether to spend or save. The rage that had sustained him for 2 years felt different now, less like a fire and more like embers, still hot enough to burn but lacking the all-consuming intensity that had driven him south to Arroyo Verde. Victor's death should have satisfied something in him, but instead it had created a strange emptiness. The man who'd betrayed him was gone, killed by someone else's hand for someone else's reasons. There had been no confrontation, no moment of recognition, no satisfaction of watching understanding dawn in Victor's eyes as he realized the dead had returned for him. Just a body wrapped in canvas and a feeling like reaching for something solid, only to find empty air. Now Lena was all that remained, the last thread connecting him to the man he'd been before the gallows, before the betrayal, before 2 years of running and hiding and planning revenge. Cut that thread, and who would he become? The question haunted him more than any ghost. Cole guided his horse down the main street of Copper Ridge, drawing the usual attention a stranger attracted in a boom town. But here the looks were different than in Arroyo Verde, less suspicious, more evaluative. Mining towns ran on a simple economy of wealth and willingness to work. Nobody cared about your past as long as you could swing a pick or had money to spend. The Silver Queen Saloon dominated the center of town, a 2-story structure that was actually painted instead of left as bare wood. The sign above the door showed a woman's silhouette holding a crown, rendered in gilt paint that caught the afternoon sun. Music drifted from inside, a piano playing something cheerful and forgettable. Cole dismounted, tying his horse to a hitching post that was already crowded with animals. He checked his weapons by habit, Colt secure in its holster, rifle in the saddle scabbard, knife in his boot. Then he stood there, hand on the saloon door, gathering himself for whatever came next. The moment stretched. Behind that door was Lena Marquez, the woman who'd kissed him the morning before the Santa Fe job, who'd told him she loved him while already planning his betrayal, who'd watched federal agents drag him away and probably smiled while counting her share of the gold. 2 years ago, he would have kicked that door open with his gun drawn, would have put a bullet in her before she could speak. But 2 years was a long time to carry hatred. Long enough to wear down the edges, to make you question whether the person you'd become was worth the cost of vengeance. Cole pushed open the door. The saloon's interior was surprisingly refined for a mining town. Gas lamps provided steady light instead of smoky lanterns. The bar was actual mahogany instead of rough pine, and the paintings on the walls managed to be suggestive without being crude. The crowd was mixed, miners still dusty from their shifts, Businessmen in suits discussing claims and investments, a few women in bright dresses working the room with practiced charm. And behind the bar, directing the chaos with the easy authority of ownership, was Lena. She'd changed. Her dark hair was styled differently, pulled back in an elaborate arrangement that probably took an hour to create. Her dress was expensive, the kind of garment that came from San Francisco rather than a local seamstress. She'd put on a little weight, losing the lean hardness of someone living on the run and gaining the comfortable curves of prosperity. But her eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, always watching for opportunity or threat. Those eyes swept across the room, touching each patron briefly, cataloging them. And then they landed on Cole. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then recognition flared, followed by shock so profound that the whiskey bottle she'd been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound cut through the saloon's noise. Conversation stopped. People turned to look. Lena stood frozen behind the bar, her face cycling through expressions too fast to track. Disbelief, fear, calculation, and finally a kind of weary resignation that suggested she'd been expecting this moment for 2 years. "Well," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "I suppose dead men don't stay buried after all." Cole walked toward the bar, the crowd parting before him without being asked. He moved with the measured pace of a man who'd already won, who knew that running would accomplish nothing. When he reached the bar, he stood there, meeting her eyes across the polished wood that separated them. "Hello, Lena." "Cole." She glanced at the broken bottle, then back at him. "Or should I call you Damon? I heard you were hanged. Read the reports myself. They were very specific about you being dead. Reports were wrong. Rope broke. I see that." Her hand moved subtly toward something beneath the bar, probably a gun, then stopped when Cole's own hand dropped to his Colt. "Are you here to kill me?" "I don't know yet." The honesty seemed to surprise her. Lena's carefully constructed expression cracked slightly, showing something raw underneath. "That's fair, I suppose. After what I did, what Victor and I did, you'd be justified." She raised her voice slightly, addressing the room. "Everyone out, now. This is private business." "But Miss Lena," one of the bartenders started. "Out, all of you. Take a 30-minute break. Drinks on the house when you come back." The promise of free alcohol motivated the crowd effectively. Within 2 minutes, the saloon was empty except for Cole and Lena, the sounds of the town drifting through walls that suddenly felt too thin, too fragile to contain what was about to happen. Lena poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle she pulled from beneath the bar, pushing one across to Cole. "Might as well have a drink before whatever this is." Cole looked at the glass, but didn't touch it. "You poison it?" "If I wanted to poison you, I'd have done it 2 years ago." She drank from her own glass, then refilled it. "I'm many things, Cole, but I'm not a coward. If you're here to kill me, I won't run, won't beg. I'll just ask that you make it quick." "Why?" The question came out rougher than he'd intended. "Why betray me? We were partners. We were—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Lovers?" Lena's smile was bitter. "Is that what you thought we were? Cole, I liked you, maybe even cared about you in my own way. But love? Love is a fairy tale that gets people killed in this business." "So it was just about the money." "It's always about the money, you know that." Everything we did, the banks, the trains, the whole outlaw life, it was all about accumulating enough wealth to disappear and live like civilized people. She set down her glass with enough force to make it ring. "Victor and I saw an opportunity to double our take and eliminate the one person who might come after us. We took it. That's how survival works in this world." "You put a noose around my neck." "Yes." No hesitation, no attempt to soften it. "We did. And I watched them lead you to the gallows, and I felt nothing. Because feeling something would have meant admitting what we'd done was wrong, and I couldn't afford that kind of weakness." Cole finally picked up the whiskey and drained it in one swallow. The burn was familiar, grounding. "And now? Now that I'm standing here, very much alive and carrying a gun, what do you feel now?" Lena was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those sharp eyes that had once looked at him with something that resembled affection. "Tired," she said finally. "I feel tired. Do you know what it's like, Cole, spending 2 years waiting for the other shoe to drop? waiting for you to appear in my doorway with death in your eyes? I built this place from nothing, created a new identity, convinced myself I was safe. But every time a stranger walked in, every time someone looked at me too long, I wondered if it was you, if today was the day I'd pay for what I'd done. Good. You should have been afraid. Oh, I am. She refilled both their glasses. But here's the thing I learned in these 2 years. Fear doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo betrayal, doesn't bring back trust, doesn't make you a different person than who you actually are. I betrayed you because that's who I am, a survivor who makes hard choices and lives with the consequences. Those consequences are about to get a lot harder. Are they? Lena tilted her head, and there was something almost like hope in her expression. Because you could have shot me the moment you walked in. You could have put a bullet in my back from across the room. But you didn't. You walked up to the bar, accepted a drink, started a conversation. That's not the behavior of a man who's decided to kill. Cole's hand tightened on his glass. Maybe I wanted you to know it was coming, wanted you to see my face and understand what you'd done. Or maybe you wanted me to give you a reason not to pull that trigger, a reason to believe that not everyone who betrayed you deserves to die. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. I heard about Victor. Word travels in our circles. Heard Madero put a bullet in his head after your little war in Arroyo Verde. How'd that feel, Cole? Getting your revenge by proxy? Did it satisfy that hunger you've been feeding for 2 years? No. The admission came out before he could stop it. It felt like nothing, like reaching the end of a long road and finding out the destination was just more road. Then why are you here? What do you actually want from me? Cole set down his glass, his hand moving to rest on his Colt. The metal was warm from body heat, familiar, comforting in its lethal certainty. He could draw, fire, end this conversation and Lena's life in the space between heartbeats. 2 years of waiting, planning, imagining this moment. 2 years of being driven forward by the promise of justice or vengeance or whatever name you wanted to give to killing the people who'd wronged you. But as he stood there, looking at Lena's resigned face, he realized something fundamental had shifted. The rage that had sustained him felt distant now, like a fire burning in another room, present but not consuming, powerful but not controlling. I want to understand, he said finally. I want to know how someone I trusted, someone I cared about, could look me in the eyes and condemn me to death without hesitation. Because if I can understand that, maybe I can understand what the world actually is instead of what I wanted it to be. Lena laughed, but it was a hollow sound. You want philosophy from a saloon owner in a mining town? Fine. Here's your answer. People are capable of anything when they're scared enough or desperate enough or convinced that their survival matters more than anyone else's. You think you're special because you got betrayed? Look around, Cole. The world runs on betrayal. Every business deal, every political alliance, every marriage. They're all just waiting for the moment when one person decides their interests matter more than the agreement. That's bleak. That's reality. And you know what the really ugly truth is? You would have done the same thing if the situation were reversed. If it came down to your life or mine, your freedom or my execution, you'd have made the same choice Victor and I made. Maybe you'd have felt worse about it. Maybe you'd have actually experienced guilt, but you'd have done it. No. Cole shook his head. I wouldn't have. Keep telling yourself that, but we both know loyalty is just another word for not yet being tested hard enough. Lena drained her glass again, and Cole noticed her hand was shaking slightly. So go ahead. Draw that gun, pull the trigger, balance the scales. I won't stop you. Won't even argue. You've earned the right to my life if that's what you decide you want. She stood there, arms at her sides, waiting. The saloon was quiet except for the distant sounds of the town outside and the ticking of a clock somewhere behind the bar. Cole's hand remained on his Colt, finger brushing the grip, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon that had saved his life a dozen times. 1 bullet. That's all it would take. 1 bullet to end the woman who'd betrayed him, to close the final chapter of his old life, to prove that actions had consequences and debts always came due. But as his fingers tightened on the gun, Cole found himself thinking about Arroyo Verde, about Ethan standing up to Madero's men despite being terrified, about Martinez and the ranchers choosing to fight rather than submit. About the way a town full of frightened people had found courage not through violence but through solidarity and shared purpose. He thought about the moment in the canyon when he'd chosen to let Madero live, when he'd decided that some fates were worse than death. He thought about the emptiness he'd felt looking at Victor's body, the hollow victory of revenge served cold by someone else's hand, and he thought about Ethan's parting words. Forgiveness isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can do. Cole's hand fell away from his gun. "I'm not going to kill you," he said quietly. Lena's eyes widened in genuine shock. "What?" "I said I'm not going to kill you. Not because you don't deserve it, not because I've forgiven what you did, but because—" He paused, searching for words to explain something he barely understood himself. "Because I've spent 2 years being defined by what you and Victor took from me. 2 years being the man with the rope scar and the burning need for revenge. And if I kill you now, that's all I'll ever be. The ghost of Damon Blake, forever trapped in the moment of betrayal, unable to move forward because I'm too busy looking back." "So what? You're just going to walk away? Pretend none of this happened?" "No. I'll remember every moment, remember the rope, the fall, the 2 years of hunting, but I'm choosing to let that be the past instead of the future." Cole met her eyes steadily. "You were right about one thing. Fear doesn't change anything. Neither does revenge. All it does is keep you locked in the same pattern, repeating the same violence until it's all you know." "Then what will you do?" Cole considered the question. He'd been so focused on finding Victor and Lena that he'd never thought beyond that goal. Never imagined a life that wasn't centered on vengeance and survival. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "I don't know," he admitted. "Figure out who Cole Maddox is when he's not hunting ghosts, I suppose. Maybe head west, find some place where Damon Blake's reputation doesn't reach. Start over with a clean slate and see if I can be something other than an outlaw or a killer or a victim." That's surprisingly mature. Don't mistake mercy for maturity. I still want to kill you, still feel that rage sitting just beneath the surface, but I'm choosing not to act on it because I've seen where that road leads and I don't like the destination. Cole turned toward the door, then paused. "But know this, Lena. If I ever see you again, if our paths cross in any town or on any trail, this mercy expires. I'm giving you a chance to live because I'm trying to be better than what you made me. Don't test whether I've succeeded." "Wait." Lena's voice stopped him at the threshold. "Victor? Before he died, did he say anything about me?" Cole looked back at her, seeing the vulnerability beneath the hardness, the small part of her that still cared about the man she'd betrayed alongside. "He said you cleaned him out, took your share of the gold and disappeared. Said you betrayed him the same way you betrayed me." "That's not true. I gave Victor his half. We split everything evenly down the middle." Lena's voice carried genuine hurt. "Why would he lie about that?" "Maybe because betrayal changes how you see the world. Once you cross that line, it gets easier to believe everyone else has crossed it too." Cole shrugged. "Or maybe he was just trying to hurt me one last time by making me think you were even worse than I already knew you to be. Either way, he's dead and the truth doesn't matter anymore." "Did you kill him?" "No, Madero did. Put a bullet in his head for being weak and leading me to Arroyo Verde." Cole's hand touched the rope scar on his neck unconsciously. "I wanted to be the one. Wanted him to know it was me pulling the trigger. But someone else decided his fate, and I had to accept that revenge doesn't always come in the form you imagined." Lena nodded slowly, processing this information. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not sorry enough to have done things differently. I'm not going to lie about that. But sorry that it had to be you. You were a good man, Cole. Probably still are, despite everything we did to you. And you deserve better than what Victor and I gave you." "Yeah, I did." Cole opened the door, letting afternoon light spill into the saloon. "But deserving something and getting it are two different things. I've learned to live with the difference." He stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, leaving Lena standing behind her bar with 2 glasses of whiskey and the weight of a mercy she hadn't expected. The street was busy with miners and merchants, the town continuing its daily rhythm without pause for the drama that had just unfolded in the Silver Queen. Cole untied his horse, running his hand along the animal's neck, feeling the solid warmth of living muscle and bone. The gelding had carried him faithfully for 2 years through deserts and mountains, through danger and desperation. Now it would carry him somewhere new, somewhere that didn't echo with ghosts of betrayal and lost brotherhood. "Mister?" Cole turned to find a boy of maybe 10 standing nearby, holding a newspaper. "You're him, aren't you? Damon Blake? I heard Miss Lena say it when everyone was leaving." "No," Cole said firmly. "Damon Blake died on a gallows in Silver Creek. I'm just someone who looks like him." "But the rope scar got caught in a fence wire. Happens on ranches." Cole pulled a coin from his pocket and handed it to the boy. "Here, buy yourself something sweet and forget you ever saw me." The boy took the coin and ran off, already moving on to the next curiosity. Cole smiled slightly. Let Damon Blake remain a ghost, a story told in saloons and around campfires. Let people argue about whether he'd really died or faked his death or risen from the grave like some avenging spirit. The legend could survive without him. Cole Maddox was done being legendary. He mounted his horse and turned west, toward the mountains that marked the edge of the territories he'd haunted for 2 years. Beyond those mountains was Oregon, California, the vast Pacific coast where a man could disappear and start fresh, where nobody cared about Spanish gold or federal hangings or cattle barons who'd gotten what they deserved. As he rode out of Copper Ridge, Cole allowed himself one last look back. The Silver Queen Saloon stood proud and prosperous, a monument to Lena's survival instinct and willingness to do whatever it took to build something from blood and betrayal. She would continue running her establishment, probably watching every stranger who walked through her door for the rest of her life, never quite sure if today was the day Cole changed his mind about mercy. That uncertainty was its own kind of prison. Cole had learned to live with his scars, the rope burn on his neck, the bullet wounds from various encounters, the psychic damage of betrayal and survival. Now Lena would learn to live with hers, invisible but no less permanent. The thought brought him a grim satisfaction that felt healthier than the rage that had driven him for so long. The mountains rose before him, pine-covered slopes turning gold and orange in the autumn light. Cole urged his horse into a steady trot, eating up the miles between who he'd been and who he might become. Somewhere ahead was a life that didn't revolve around revenge. Somewhere ahead was the possibility of being ordinary, anonymous, perhaps even content. The idea was foreign and strange, and more frightening than any gunfight he'd ever faced. But Cole had survived a hanging, dismantled an empire, and walked away from killing the woman who'd betrayed him. If he could do all that, he could figure out how to be human again, how to trust without being paralyzed by the fear of betrayal, how to build instead of destroying, how to look forward instead of constantly checking his back trail. It wouldn't be easy. The rope scar would always be there, a permanent reminder of how close he'd come to death and how far he'd fallen from grace. The nightmares would probably continue. The moment of the drop, the sensation of falling, the cotton gag choking off his last words. And there would be days when the rage returned, when he'd question his decision to spare Lena, when the ghost of Damon Blake whispered that violence was simpler than mercy. But he'd face those challenges when they came, the same way he'd faced everything else. One day at a time, one choice at a time, slowly building a life that wasn't defined by what others had taken from him. The sun was setting as Cole crested the first ridge, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple and crimson. He paused there, looking back at the territories he was leaving behind. Arroyo Verde, where frightened ranchers had found courage. Blackwater Canyon, where an empire had crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. Copper Ridge, where he'd chosen mercy over vengeance and uncertainty over the cold certainty of a bullet. All of it was past now. All of it was memory. Cole turned his horse west and rode toward the sunset, toward whatever waited beyond the mountains. He didn't know what he'd find there. Didn't know if redemption was even possible for a man with his history. But for the first time in 2 years, he was riding toward something instead of running from it. And maybe, he thought, as the last light faded and the stars began to emerge, maybe that was enough. Maybe the journey from who you were to who you might become was all anyone could ask for. Maybe healing wasn't about erasing the scars, but about learning to carry them without letting them define everything you were. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, a coyote sang its lonely song to the indifferent stars. But Cole wasn't lonely anymore. He was free, free from the obsession that had driven him, free from the need for revenge. free from the ghost of Damon Blake. Just Cole Maddox, riding west with a rope scar on his neck and a future that finally belonged to him. The mountains swallowed him slowly, the trail winding between ancient pines that had stood long before his troubles began and would stand long after they were forgotten. And as the night closed in around him, Cole allowed himself something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of a drowning man grasping for driftwood, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who'd survived the worst and discovered they were stronger than they'd believed. The kind of hope that whispered that tomorrow might be better than today, and the day after that might be better still. The frontier stretched endlessly before him, full of possibility and danger and the chance to write a new story over the old. And Cole Maddox, outlaw and survivor and reluctant hero, rode forward to meet whatever that frontier held, carrying his scars with grace and his future with courage. The past was buried. The dead had been settled. And the wide, wild frontier waited for a man finally free to choose his own path.